At the airport, two freckled kids with ginger hair and green eyes try to board alone. The staff stop them after seeing their last name. A billionaire CEO boarding the same flight freezes when he hears it. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The automated doors slid open with a hiss, letting in a burst of noise from the bustling departure hall at JFK Airport. 15-year-old twins Lillian and Leon Hawthorne stepped forward with identical expressions of guarded excitement. Each carried a worn backpack slung over a shoulder, their movements perfectly in sync. They had saved for months to purchase these plane tickets, cutting corners at every turn, doing odd jobs, even selling some old gadgets online. It was supposed to be the first adventure they'd ever taken on their own, a flight to visit distant relatives in Colorado. Yet neither could shake the nervous feeling that had been growing since that morning. Something in the air felt wrong. The swirl of travelers, the muffled announcements echoing overhead, and the bright digital screens displaying destinations promised freedom, but their throbbing anxiety whispered otherwise. Even so, they clung to each other, determined to see it through. As they joined the snaking security line, a pang of worry rippled through Lillian's chest. She glanced at Leon, noticing the way his fingers curled a little too tightly around his boarding pass. Their matching dark hair, cut short for convenience, framed each of their faces with a serious, almost reflective look. Overhead lights glinted off the metal detectors. TSA officers strode back and forth, occasionally directing a passenger to a separate area. Nothing seemed unusual on the surface, yet Lillian couldn't dismiss the sense of a heavy weight pressing on her chest. She inhaled slowly, fighting to keep her composure. Maybe she was just nervous about flying. She'd never traveled by plane before, and neither had Leon. They were city kids, used to subways and buses, not soaring in the sky. Still, the way that tension gripped the pit of her stomach felt more sinister than simple pre-travel jitters. Leon tried to offer a reassuring smile, but it flickered across his face so quickly that Lillian barely caught it. They edged closer to the scanner, obediently removing their shoes and placing them in gray plastic tubs. Lillian carefully extracted a small bag of toiletries, aware that the TSA rules could be strict. As she slipped her phone into a separate bin, she noticed an officer standing behind the conveyor belt, frowning at something on his monitor. Everyone else seemed to pass without issue, dropping laptops and wallets into the containers, shuffling forward when commanded. But then, the officer's gaze locked on the twins' passports resting in the final bin. His frown deepened. Lillian's pulse quickened as she saw him exchange a glance with a colleague. A hushed word passed between them, and that colleague nodded toward a side door. Neither twin had any idea what it meant, but cold dread settled in Lillian's gut. When they stepped through the metal detector, another agent with a stern expression motioned for them to step aside. Confusion washed over Leon's face. He held his boarding pass protectively, as though it might solve whatever problem this was. Lillian forced a polite tone into her voice. "Is something wrong?" she asked, refusing to let her voice tremble. The agent didn't respond immediately, but gestured toward a small seating area behind a tall partition. "Please wait over there." She spoke evenly, not unkindly, but with finality. The agent then lifted a phone from the desk, making a call in low, urgent tones. It felt as though the crowd around them had vanished. The rest of the travelers moved on to their gates, oblivious to the twins' predicament. Lillian and Leon shared a look of alarm. Neither spoke, but their thoughts were the same. Why were they being singled out? Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Lillian's mind raced with reasons they might be held back. She and Leon had saved for the tickets legally, had used their real identification, had parental permission forms in their bags. Everything was in order, so what was going on? At long last, a uniformed security official with silver hair and a crisp posture approached them. "Hawthorne? Lillian and Leon Hawthorne?" he asked in a clipped tone. The twins nodded. "Come with me," he instructed, pivoting to lead them into a small private office. Lillian glanced back once, seeing nervous families hurry by, but the sight only heightened her sense of isolation. The official closed the door behind them, and the tiny room's fluorescent light cast stark shadows on the walls. An oversized desk stood to one side, stacked with forms and a computer terminal. In the center of the desk lay the twins' passports open to their photos. "My name's Officer Brandt," he said, gesturing for them to sit on a pair of uncomfortable plastic chairs. "We had a flag come up when we scanned your passports." Lillian's heart hammered. She tried to find her voice, but Leon beat her to it. "A flag? Why?" His tone was wary, but it held an edge of defiance. Officer Brandt studied them both. He seemed to weigh the sincerity in their faces before responding. "It's your last name. Hawthorne. Do either of you have any connection to the Hawthorne family that owns the Gilded Crest Corporation?" The question landed like a thunderbolt in the silent office. Lillian gave Leon a sharp, wide-eyed glance. They knew of that family, of course. Everyone in the city did. Billionaire J. Wyatt Hawthorne's name was plastered across billboards for hotels, property developments, and philanthropic campaigns. But as far as either twin knew, their Hawthorne name was pure coincidence. They'd never had money, let alone connections to one of the country's wealthiest men. "No," Lillian managed, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "We've never met him." Leon added, "We don't have any famous relatives." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Our database shows a link between your passports and an ongoing inquiry. That's all I'm allowed to say." Lillian's stomach twisted. Ongoing inquiry? She had never even gotten a speeding ticket. How could their last name have triggered such a response? She felt the first stirrings of anger mingling with the fear. This had to be a mistake. "Sir," she said carefully, "we're just traveling to Colorado to visit our great-aunt. There's nothing suspicious about us." Brandt took a slow breath. "We'll find that out. Until then, I have to notify the relevant authorities. If there's no real issue, you'll be free to go. But I need you to wait here." The door to the office swung open again, admitting a second official, a woman with a badge clipped to her blazer reading Homeland Liaison. She introduced herself curtly as Ms. Kincaid, her eyes darting from Lillian to Leon. She carried a slim file in her hand, and when she stepped forward, the tension in the room spiked. Her voice was calm, yet firm. "You're minors, correct? We'll need to contact your guardians." Lillian felt a jolt of panic. Their mother was out of town working in another state. They had permission to travel, all the correct paperwork. But would a phone call to their mother even help? Ms. Kincaid glanced at a note in the file. "We have a discrepancy with the last name Hawthorne. We need to clarify your family history. If everything checks out, you'll be on your way." Leon bristled. "We've never even seen that man, Wyatt Hawthorne, in our lives." Miss Kincaid's expression flickered with something that might have been sympathy. "That may be so, but we still need to follow protocol." Sensing their growing distress, Officer Brandt offered a faint, apologetic shrug. "It's unusual, kids," he said softly, "but sometimes high-profile names end up in watch lists. Inheritance disputes, custody issues, anything that might cause concern. Until it's cleared, we have to keep you here." Lillian felt frustration welling. They were missing their flight, and with every passing minute her hopes for this trip were slipping through her fingers. Leon's cheeks flushed. "We don't have any father," he blurted more loudly than he intended. "Mom raised us alone. We've never had a man named Hawthorne in our family, ever." Ms. Kincaid's eyes narrowed slightly, as though she were filing that piece of information away. "Thank you. That's helpful to know." but I still need to ask you both a few more questions." The next half hour was a haze of interrogation. They were asked about their mother's full name, their grandparents, any possible uncles or aunts on the paternal side. The twins had no solid answers. Their mother barely spoke of their father, let alone a family tree that stretched into billionaire territory. Officer Brandt typed notes into a computer as Ms. Kincaid listened intently to every word. Eventually, the tension in the room became suffocating. Lillian could see the reflection of a clock on the glass partition behind the desk. Their plane would be departing soon. If this went on much longer, they'd definitely miss the flight. The thought sparked a fresh wave of desperation. "Please," she said softly. "We're not lying. This is just some big misunderstanding. We've never even heard from anyone in that Hawthorne empire." Ms. Kincaid and Officer Brandt exchanged a look. "We'll do what we can to expedite the process," Ms. Kincaid replied at last. "But we can't release you until we've spoken to all necessary parties." Leon's fists were clenched in his lap, knuckles whitening. Lillian placed a hand on his arm, a silent reminder to stay calm. They were just kids, trapped in a maze they never asked to enter. Outside, life went on. Passengers boarded flights, families reunited, announcements repeated. Inside that small office, it felt like time had frozen. Lillian's mind spun with questions. What if Wyatt Hawthorne himself had flagged them for some reason? Or was it just an automated system linking their names? Could there be something their mother never told them, some buried truth that explained this mess? Before Lillian could speak, Ms. Kincaid's phone buzzed. The woman answered quickly, turning away from the twins as she spoke in hushed tones. When she ended the call, her gaze flickered with renewed urgency. "We have new information. I'm afraid this situation is more complex than a simple name match." Lillian's chest tightened. Leon leaned forward, breathing unsteadily. Ms. Kincaid set her phone down. "We've confirmed that the last name Hawthorne has been part of a private investigation related to a billionaire family dispute. There's reason to believe the two of you might be connected, whether you're aware of it or not." The words dropped into the hush like stones plopping into deep water. Lillian and Leon exchanged stunned glances. Everything felt surreal, as though they had stumbled into the script of someone else's life. Ms. Kincaid sighed. "We have to place a temporary hold on your travel until we figure this out. You won't be leaving on your scheduled flight." Lillian felt tears threaten at the corners of her eyes. Leon's voice came out hoarse. "But this is our only chance to visit our aunt. We can't afford another ticket. Please don't do this." Officer Brandt seemed genuinely sympathetic, but looked powerless to intervene. Ms. Kincaid shook her head. "I'm sorry, kids. For now, you're required to stay within airport security. We need to find out what's really going on." In that moment, Lillian felt their future hanging in the balance, an invisible door slamming shut on the life they thought they had. She could see it in Leon's stricken face, too. The sinking dread that they might be entwined in a secret that could change everything they believed about themselves and their family. And as the airport bustle continued just steps away, the twins realized there was no going back. Only forward, deeper into a mystery they never saw coming. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. Moments after Ms. Kincaid delivered her final statement, the tension in the cramped office intensified. Lillian felt her heart beating so loudly that she half expected everyone else to hear it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Leon cleared his throat, sounding timid in the otherwise suffocating silence. "So what now?" he asked, voice shaking just enough to betray the swirl of thoughts in his head. Neither Ms. Kincaid nor Officer Brandt answered right away. They just exchanged another of those unreadable looks like two people mentally conferring before giving the twins a verdict. Lillian realized how powerless she felt. the realization sparking a dull panic in her chest. Finally, Ms. Kincaid exhaled. "We've contacted your mother," she said, lifting her gaze to meet Lillian's. "We haven't been able to reach her yet, but we left messages. There's also another matter." She stopped, hesitating as if unsure how to phrase her next words. "We've reached out to the Hawthorne legal office. Given the nature of the circumstances, we need clarification from their side as well." The mention of that name, Hawthorne, made Leon's stomach twist. He drummed restless fingers on his thigh, wishing with all his might that they'd never bought these stupid plane tickets. If they'd just stayed home, none of this would be happening. "This is insane," Leon muttered, earning a reproachful glance from Ms. Kincaid. Lillian touched her brother's arm lightly, hoping he wouldn't push too far. The last thing they needed was for him to lose his temper with officials who held all the power. Still, she understood his frustration. Their aunt had already been expecting them tonight. They had told her to meet them at the small regional airport in Colorado, a plan that now seemed laughable. The clock on the wall showed they'd missed their flight by at least half an hour. Lillian felt an urge to cry, but held it together, swallowing the lump in her throat. Officer Brandt cleared his throat. "There's a small waiting area a few doors down. It's more comfortable than this. We'll let you sit there until we hear back from the relevant parties. Don't worry, nobody's accusing you of wrongdoing. But until we have clarity, we can't release you." The words might have been meant to reassure them, yet they only underscored how trapped the twins truly were. Ms. Kincaid led them out of the room, down a short corridor, and into a lounge that looked more like an employee break room than anything designed for passengers. Lillian noticed old coffee cups in the sink and a half-empty box of donuts on a side table. The overhead lighting flickered slightly, making everything feel even more surreal. Leon dropped into one of the worn chairs with a sigh. "This is so messed up," he grumbled. Lillian nodded, lowering herself into the seat beside him. She couldn't summon any comforting words. All she felt was a cold swirl of fear. If the airport security and Ms. Kincaid believed they might have some hidden link to Wyatt Hawthorne, what would they do if that turned out to be true? Their mother had always been vague about their father's identity. Whenever they asked, she'd just say it was someone who preferred not to be involved. Could that someone be a member of the Hawthorne dynasty? The mere thought made Lillian's stomach clench. A half hour trickled by in tense silence. Leon tried playing a game on his phone, but every buzz or ring from the hallway pulled his attention away. Lillian attempted to close her eyes, as if ignoring the situation would help, but restless thoughts kept her wide awake. Eventually, Ms. Kincaid reappeared, stepping into the lounge with the same crisp manner. "We've got word from the Hawthorne attorneys," she announced, her tone heavy. "They'd like to send a representative here to speak with you." Leon blinked. "Speak to us? Why?" Ms. Kincaid frowned. "They're claiming it might be in everyone's best interest to figure out the truth quickly. Evidently, something about your documents suggests a potential family connection. They want to confirm or refute that possibility." Lillian's head spun. A Hawthorne attorney was coming to the airport to question them? This felt like a nightmare. "What if we refuse?" she asked in a small voice. Ms. Kincaid's expression remained sympathetic but resolute. "Refusing is within your rights, of course. But until your mother contacts us, we can't just ignore the flagged passport inquiry. Meeting with the attorney could accelerate the process." Lillian exchanged a frightened look with Leon. They'd always been told to avoid strangers wanting personal details, but now they were forced into a situation that felt bigger than both of them combined. "We'll talk to them," Leon said quietly, setting his jaw. "We have nothing to hide." Time seemed to crawl after that. The overhead lights buzzed softly, and every sound in the hallway seemed amplified. Lillian counted footsteps, voices, the squeak of a cart's wheels as a janitor walked by. Finally, 2 hours past their original flight's departure, the door to the lounge swung open again. A tall, poised woman with sleek black hair and a tailored suit stepped in. She looked entirely out of place in the dingy break room, like a figure from a glossy magazine who'd been dropped into a random corner of the airport. Her eyes, a dark hazel, flicked across the twins before she gave a professional nod. "I'm Charlotte Reese," she said, voice carrying an air of polished confidence. "I represent the Hawthorne family's legal interests." Leon stood up, feeling an instinctive tension coil inside him. "I'm Leon. This is my sister Lillian." He sounded braver than he felt, but he wouldn't let her see his nerves. Ms. Reese gave a faint smile. "Well, Lillian, I appreciate you meeting me under these circumstances. I know this must be unsettling for you." Lillian rose as well, crossing her arms. "That's an understatement." Ms. Reese nodded, acknowledging the frustration in Lillian's voice. She then extended a hand, which neither twin shook immediately. After an awkward beat, she let it drop. "All right," she said, "I'll get straight to the point. Our office was notified of a passport flag suggesting your last name might connect you to the Hawthorne lineage. We have certain protocols to follow when any claim arises regarding potential heirs." Lillian's heart lurched. Potential heirs. That sounded downright ridiculous. She'd read about the Hawthorne estate in news articles, enormous wealth, lavish parties, a sprawling family tree full of complicated alliances. None of that had anything to do with her or Leon. "Look," she said firmly, "we don't know Wyatt Hawthorne or any of his relatives. Our mother never mentioned him. We've lived our whole lives in a small apartment in Queens. This is just a giant mistake." Ms. Reese studied Lillian for a moment, not unkindly. "I hear you," she replied, "and it could be a mistake. But I need to ask you both a few questions, and we might consider a brief DNA test to rule out any confusion. If you're not related, we'll have the flag removed immediately and ensure you're compensated for your lost flight." Leon's eyes widened at the mention of compensation, but his suspicion grew sharper. DNA tests. That was an enormous intrusion. "We're not just going to hand over our DNA," he snapped. "We haven't done anything wrong." Ms. Reese lifted a palm in a gesture of calm. "No one's accusing you of wrongdoing, but given the circumstances, your father being unknown, the matching last name, it raises questions. My client wants to make sure there's no oversight in paternity records. If you refuse, that's your choice. However, until this is settled, you'll remain in bureaucratic limbo." That final phrase, bureaucratic limbo, hung in the air. Lillian could see Leon's anger building. She reached for his wrist, gently urging restraint. "This is crazy," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "What would happen if we agreed?" Ms. Reese met her gaze, unwavering. "Then we'd coordinate with a nearby medical facility, a simple swab test which we can expedite. If it turns out you are not biologically connected to Wyatt Hawthorne or his immediate family, you'll be cleared in a matter of days. If the result indicates a match, well..." She trailed off, letting the implication speak for itself. Leon felt like his head might explode. How could this day have derailed so badly? One minute, they were excited to board a plane for a simple family visit. The next, they were discussing paternity claims with a corporate lawyer. "We should at least call Mom," he managed, swallowing the lump in his throat. "She's the one who would know. Maybe there's some missing piece." Ms. Reese nodded. "I understand she's out of town, correct? We'll keep trying to reach her. In the meantime, I have a car waiting if you decide to proceed with the test. It doesn't have to be tonight, but the sooner we do it, the sooner this issue resolves." A heavy silence settled. Lillian glanced at Leon, searching his eyes for any sign of what to do. Despite all their disagreements over the years, they'd never faced a crisis like this. They always stuck together, especially when cornered. Leon exhaled, dropping his gaze to the floor. "Let's just get it over with," he said softly. "I don't want them holding us here forever." It felt like he was caving, and maybe he was, but Lillian recognized the logic behind his words. If there was really no connection, a test would free them from all this absurdity. Lillian gave a jerky nod, her throat too tight to speak. "All right," Ms. Reese said. "I'll make the necessary calls. The local clinic can do a rush test. In the meantime, you're free to stay at a hotel near the airport. We'll arrange everything." Ms. Kincaid stepped forward, crossing her arms. "I'll coordinate with airport security to sign them out, but Ms. Reese, if you plan to move them off-site, I need confirmation that they'll remain available for any follow-up questions." Ms. Reese nodded. "Of course. I'll keep you informed." Everything happened quickly after that. Paperwork was signed. Calls were made. Within an hour, Lillian and Leon found themselves ushered out of the bowels of the airport, not as normal passengers, but as wards of a complicated procedure that none of them truly understood. A sleek black sedan idled outside, its tinted windows reflecting the bright airport lights. Ms. Reese invited them to climb in, promising that the hospital was just a short drive away. Leon held the door for his sister, and as she slipped onto the leather seat, Lillian's mind whirled. She couldn't decide what frightened her more, the possibility that they had absolutely no connection to the Hawthorne family and were simply losing their chance to see their aunt for nothing, or the possibility that the test might prove some unimaginable truth. The swirling confusion made her stomach roil. Leon slid in beside her, his expression grim. Ms. Reese took the front seat, greeting the driver with a quick nod. They pulled out into the chaotic swirl of traffic, the airport's glow receding behind them like a distant planet. Silence reigned in the back seat. The city lights flickered across the twins' faces, illuminating worry in Lillian's eyes and steely determination in Leon's. Soon the car merged onto a highway, and Lillian realized she had never felt so unmoored in her life. Normally, she trusted her instincts, but now every step took them further into murkiness. Leon leaned toward her, whispering so Ms. Reese couldn't hear, "What if it's true?" His breath caught. "What if we are related to him?" Lillian swallowed, pressing her lips into a thin line. "Let's just wait for the test," she managed, not wanting to vocalize the same question that plagued her own heart. They were about to step into a realm they'd never asked for, where billionaire disputes and hidden pasts collided with their simplest dreams. In that car, speeding away from the airport, it felt like they were leaving their old lives far behind. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. Night had fully settled by the time the sedan pulled up to a small private clinic whose glowing signs seemed to hover against the inky sky. Lillian pressed her face to the window and felt a tremor of anticipation. She couldn't decide whether she was more afraid of stepping out into the chill evening air or of staying in that car, trapped with thoughts she could not escape. In the end, Ms. Reese's soft, businesslike voice spurred her into motion. "We're here." Leon opened the door and stepped out first, scanning the building. It looked nondescript, like a million other offices hidden among the city's labyrinth of streets. A row of faintly lit windows lined a flat exterior wall, and a well-worn sidewalk led to tinted glass doors. Despite the mild weather, an inexplicable gust of cold wind made him shiver. He waited for Lillian to join him on the curb. Ms. Reese exited the front seat and waved the driver off, indicating he should circle the block or wait elsewhere. There was a moment of stillness, with only the distant hum of traffic and the flicker of a street lamp overhead. "We'll head inside," Ms. Reese said. "The technician is expecting us. This shouldn't take long, then you can both get some rest." They filed into the clinic's lobby, which was quiet enough to seem deserted. A lone receptionist looked up from behind a tall counter, her eyes reflecting mild surprise at the late visit. Ms. Reese approached, flashed an ID badge, and spoke in hushed tones. The receptionist nodded and beckoned for them to pass through a side door into a narrow hallway. Lillian's heart pounded as they walked. It all felt so clinical, so final. She found herself resisting each footstep, as though every step deeper into the building was a step away from the only life she'd ever known. Soon they were standing in a small examination room, furnished with a couple of chairs, a stainless steel cart, and a sink. An older man in a lab coat appeared, wiping his hands on a paper towel. He introduced himself politely as Dr. Fernley, though his gaze flicked with curiosity over the teenage twins. "We'll perform a straightforward cheek swab," he explained. "It's painless and quick. Results can be expedited, thanks to Ms. Reese's instructions." He motioned for Lillian to step forward first. Her legs felt like lead as she moved closer. Dr. Fernley had her open her mouth. In seconds, he collected the sample, carefully sealing it in a sterile container. Then it was Leon's turn. He made a show of rolling his eyes, though he allowed the swab without protest. Ms. Reese watched from the side, her expression unreadable. When the process was done, Dr. Fernley promised them that initial results might come in as soon as the next afternoon, with more thorough testing confirmed within a couple of days. He left soon after, presumably to label and store the samples. As they returned to the lobby, Ms. Reese's phone chimed. She excused herself, retreating into a corner to answer. Lillian and Leon lingered near the reception desk, both exhausted. Sensing their fatigue, the receptionist offered them a pair of paper cups and pointed to a small beverage station with lukewarm coffee. Neither twin wanted to drink anything, but they each took a cup of water from a dispenser, swallowing in silence. Within minutes, Ms. Reese returned, her expression still calm yet tinged with a hint of urgency. "I've arranged a hotel a few blocks away," she told them. "Officer Brandt needs you to stay in the area, and this will keep you close to the clinic should they need additional samples. I'll be in touch with Ms. Kincaid, so you don't have to worry about further delays at the airport right now." Leon cleared his throat. "What if we just go home?" he asked. "It's not like we can catch a flight tonight anyway. Our apartment's not far by train." Ms. Reese pursed her lips. "Ordinarily, that would be fine. However, given the questions around your passports, the officials have asked that you remain in the immediate vicinity until everything's clarified. They don't want you disappearing, inadvertently or otherwise. You're minors, traveling on flagged documents. I'm afraid there isn't much flexibility." Lillian bristled, the sense of captivity intensifying. She glared at the slick floor tiles, wishing this day would end. "Fine," she said, her voice raw. "Let's just get to the hotel then." They ended up in another vehicle, this one a standard car driven by someone else Ms. Reese had summoned. Lillian stared out the window as the city lights blurred by. At least there was some relief in the anonymity of the night. Hundreds of strangers racing home or out to dinner, with no clue about the two teenagers whose entire future hung on a few cells taken from their cheeks. Leon said nothing, pressing himself against the door, as if distancing himself from the tension in the seat. The hotel Ms. Reese selected was modest but clean, tucked between a pharmacy and an all-night diner. Once inside, Ms. Reese handled the check-in process quickly, leaving the twins in the lobby chairs. The overhead lighting felt oppressive, and a faint scent of lemon cleaner hung in the air. Finally, Ms. Reese returned, handing them a single key card. "Room 602, she announced. 2 beds, obviously. If you need anything, call my number." She offered them a business card, and for the first time her voice softened. "Try to rest. Once Dr. Fernley has the preliminary results, we'll reconvene." With that, she turned on her heel and strode out the door, leaving them standing there, numb and utterly displaced. Leon sighed, twisting the key card in his fingers. "Does this even feel real?" he asked, leading Lillian to the elevator. She shook her head, remembering that only this morning they'd been packing, excited for a simple flight. Now they were stuck in a strange hotel, waiting to find out if some billionaire might be involved in their lives. The ride to the 6th floor was quiet, the stale elevator music doing nothing to soothe their nerves. Their room was at the end of a hallway covered in drab gray carpeting. Once inside, Lillian locked the door, and they both dropped onto the nearest bed. The silence pressed in until Leon finally spoke. "Do you think Mom knows anything about this? We still haven't heard from her." Lillian thought about it, her mind drifting to all those half-answers and subject changes their mother used to deploy whenever they asked about their dad. "It's possible," she said, voice trembling. "But if there really was a link to Wyatt Hawthorne, wouldn't she have warned us? Or maybe she was worried we'd resent her for keeping secrets." She swallowed. "I just don't know." Leon let out a slow breath, rolling onto his back to stare at the ceiling. "I can't believe we're sitting here, missing our flight, because someone thinks we might be part of the Hawthorne family. It's so weird, Lil. Like some kind of ridiculous twist in a bad movie." They fell into a pensive silence again, both replaying every memory of their childhood, wondering if there were any clues they'd overlooked. Eventually, Lillian climbed off the bed and rummaged in her backpack for her phone charger. It felt strange, but she needed some semblance of routine. She plugged in her phone near the room's small desk. "I'll try to get some sleep," she murmured, glancing at Leon. "There's nothing we can do until tomorrow anyway." Leon nodded and headed into the tiny bathroom to brush his teeth. The air in the room felt stuffy, so Lillian flicked on the fan. She tried to calm her mind, but anxiety pumped through her veins like a second heartbeat. Tomorrow, they'd get the initial test results. Tomorrow, they might find out if their entire identity was a lie. Could their father have been a Hawthorne after all? And if so, which one? Lillian recalled the tabloids that occasionally showed Wyatt Hawthorne's adult children, some older than others, some known to be at the helm of business ventures, others living lavish, controversial lives. The idea of being connected to such a scene was almost laughable. She and Leon had grown up counting pennies and discount subway cards. She curled under the thin bedspread, exhaustion finally forcing her eyes to close. Sleep came in fits and starts. She drifted through uneasy dreams of endless airport corridors and faceless lawyers demanding she prove who she was. At some point, Leon must have switched off the lights, because when Lillian jerked awake in the middle of the night, the room was dark except for the dim green glow of the alarm clock. 3:12 a.m. She stared at the ceiling for a while, hearing Leon's soft breathing from the other bed. She thought about texting her aunt in Colorado, but it was late, even earlier in Colorado's time zone. She wasn't sure how to phrase the chaos of the day. Besides, Ms. Reese had indicated that the officials might already have notified her aunt of the canceled trip. Dawn arrived in a pale wash of gray. Lillian finally climbed out of bed feeling wrung out. Leon stirred on the other side, blinking against the weak light that filtered through the curtains. They exchanged a weary glance but said nothing. After a quick shower, Lillian found the hotel's meager breakfast spread: stale cereal, pre-packaged muffins, and watery orange juice. She grabbed a couple of items for Leon, who joined her in the lobby soon after, looking about as defeated as she felt. They were halfway through forcing down the bland breakfast when Ms. Reese strode through the entrance, purposeful as ever. Somehow, in the bright morning, she looked even more polished, if that was possible. She gestured for them to join her at a corner table away from other guests. "We have the preliminary results," she said quietly, tapping her phone. Lillian's chest tightened. It felt too soon. She wasn't ready. Leon's eyes flickered with apprehension. Ms. Reese took a breath. It appears there is no immediate genetic match to Wyatt Hawthorne himself, she said, pausing while the twins momentarily exhaled in relief. But these preliminary markers aren't conclusive about other Hawthornes. There are extended family members who might share certain traits. The next battery of tests will be more precise. Leon groaned. You mean we're still stuck not knowing? Ms. Reese inclined her head in sympathy. I'm afraid so. However, we can keep digging. The Hawthorne family is large, and we need deeper analysis to see if you're connected to any of Wyatt's siblings, cousins, or children. Typically, thorough results could take a week or more. I'm doing what I can to speed it up. Lillian closed her eyes. This nightmare would drag on longer, it seemed. What happens in the meantime? She asked, her voice dull. Ms. Reese glanced at them both, then lowered her voice further. If you're open to it, there's another option. One of Mr. Hawthorne's associates suggested having you stay at a property owned by the family, a townhouse in the city. It would be more comfortable than this hotel, and it's under their direct watch, which might appease Ms. Kincaid and airport security while the investigation continues. The idea of stepping even deeper into Hawthorne territory sent a jolt of alarm through Lillian. She started to shake her head, but Leon touched her arm, eyes questioning. That's strange, Lillian said, trying to keep her composure. We don't even know if we're related to them. Why do they want us under their roof? Ms. Reese gave a thin smile. Let's just say the Hawthorne family wants to manage the situation. They don't typically leave loose ends flailing in the public eye. It's partially about PR, partially about control. Regardless of the motive, it might make this easier. They've even offered to bring your mother in once they locate her. Leon chewed his lip. They can't force us to go there, right? Ms. Reese shook her head. Not legally, but the officials might see it as a safer alternative to you drifting around the city. She tapped her phone again. At the very least, would you consider meeting a representative who can answer questions about the townhouse? It might help you decide. Lillian watched Leon, noticing how the stress lines had deepened around his eyes overnight. Neither of them wanted more confrontation. If Ms. Reese was telling the truth, staying in a property that belonged to the Hawthorne family might be an easier route to finishing these tests quickly. A flicker of stubborn defiance rose in her chest, though. Wasn't that letting the Hawthornes call the shots? On the other hand, continuing to sit in a cramped hotel room under half supervision didn't sound appealing either. Fine, she said at last, voice taut. We'll talk to whoever they send, but we haven't agreed to anything. Ms. Reese nodded, relieved. Of course, I'll arrange it. Why don't you finish breakfast? I'll have a car ready in about an hour. She paused, gave them a tight, polite smile, then left. The twins were once again alone at the small table, half-eaten muffins in front of them. Lillian slumped back. Did you ever imagine anything like this? She whispered. Yesterday we were normal. Now we're, prospective Hawthorne heirs, or maybe not. It's insane. Leon stared at the table's chipped surface. I'd give anything to rewind, he muttered. Just be on the plane heading to Colorado. His voice cracked slightly. Lillian reached out, squeezing his hand. A wave of compassion and fear washed over her. They had always been each other's constants. No matter what else changed, they had their twin bond. Now it was as if the entire universe conspired to test that solidarity. She rose, tossing her muffin wrapper into the nearby trash. Let's head back upstairs, pack our stuff. Then we'll see what the Hawthorne rep has to say. Her stomach churned at the thought. Part of her wanted to remain in denial. If they didn't cooperate, maybe this would vanish. But deep down, she suspected that once the Hawthornes set their sights on something, it was near impossible to escape. Leon trailed after her, shoulders slumped, the tension of a sleepless night making every movement feel weighted. On the elevator ride back to their room, neither spoke. Lillian thought about their mother for the 1,000th time, silently praying she'd call with answers, some explanation that would set them free. But her phone remained maddeningly silent. If their mother had intentionally hidden the twins' father's identity, it must have been for a reason. That knowledge gnawed at Lillian's heart, fueling a low burn of betrayal mixed with longing. Would they forgive her? Or would the truth, once it emerged, change everything? Back in the hotel room, the twins stuffed their sparse belongings back into their backpacks. Lillian gazed out the small window, scanning the city street below. She saw ordinary people hurrying past, a couple in jogging gear, a mother guiding a stroller, a delivery driver unloading crates. None of them had any clue about the bizarre predicament unfolding 6 floors above. That slice of ordinary life felt distant, like a different planet. She heard Leon zip his bag, and she turned to find him leaning against the wall, eyes downcast. "We'll get through this," she said softly, hoping to convince herself as much as him. "We always do." Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. The twins gathered their things and rode the elevator down in silence, stepping back into the hotel lobby with the same tense feeling they'd had when they'd arrived. Sunlight streamed in through the glass doors, illuminating the worn lounge chairs and cheap carpet. Lillian felt a surge of déjà vu. Once again, they were simply waiting, caught in a situation no one had prepared them for. Leon shifted his weight from foot to foot, scanning the room for any sign of Ms. Reese or another official who might whisk them away to yet another unknown destination. She appeared after a few more minutes, accompanied by a man in a dark suit who seemed more like private security than a typical driver. Ms. Reese flashed her reserved smile. "Good morning again," she said, indicating the man at her side. "This is Harris. He'll transport us to the Hawthorne townhouse for your meeting." The words struck Lillian like a jolt. The townhouse. There was no turning back now. She felt Leon's gaze flick toward her, as though asking if she wanted to change her mind. But the decision had already been made. Outside, the day was unusually warm for early spring. The city's constant symphony of horns and rumbling engines surrounding them on all sides. Harris led them to a sleek, charcoal-colored SUV parked at the curb. As soon as Lillian settled into the back seat, she noticed Ms. Reese take a phone call. The lawyer's expression shifted subtly, though it remained polite and focused. "Yes. No. The meeting is arranged," Ms. Reese murmured into her phone. "Of course, we'll update you." Then she ended the call, tucking her phone into her purse without further explanation. Traffic clogged the streets, but Lillian barely took in the scenery. She kept thinking about what might happen when they arrived. A building owned by the Hawthornes, did that mean one of them might be there waiting? Did the family truly believe they could be relatives? The DNA test results were still inconclusive, at least according to Ms. Reese. That left room for every wild possibility. Across from her, Leon gazed out the tinted window, his face half in shadow. He wore the same unsettled expression he'd had since the moment they were detained at the airport. Lillian swallowed, wishing she could say something reassuring, but words felt flimsy now. Eventually, the SUV turned onto a narrow side street lined with historic brownstones. Tall, graceful trees cast dappled light across the sidewalks, and the sound of car horns receded behind the hush of residential calm. Harris pulled up in front of a stately townhouse with an ornate iron fence. Intricate stonework decorated the facade, and the windows gleamed with careful upkeep. It was a place that whispered old money and refined tastes, so far removed from the cramped apartment the twins had grown up in that Lillian felt a small jolt of intimidation just looking at it. Ms. Reese exited first, then beckoned for them to follow. "This is one of several Hawthorne properties," she said, glancing toward the door. "I'll introduce you to Mr. Langford inside. He's been a family liaison for years and can answer any questions." Leon hoisted his backpack onto one shoulder. Family liaison, he repeated under his breath, the word sour. Lillian understood his cynicism. It sounded like a fancy way of saying handler. The moment they stepped through the townhouse's heavy double doors, they were met by polished marble floors, mahogany paneling, and the faint scent of fresh lilies. A tall, thin man in his 50s appeared from a side hallway. He wore a neatly pressed charcoal suit and carried himself with a posture that radiated decades of polite training. "Ms. Reese," he greeted with a slight bow, then turned to the twins. "Good morning, Leon. Lillian, my name is Bernard Langford. Please, come sit." He led them into a drawing room that seemed pulled from another era. Plush chairs arranged around a gleaming coffee table, shelves of leather-bound books, and sunlight filtering through lacy curtains. Lillian settled into one of the chairs, feeling like she might stain it just by existing. Leon chose a spot close to her. Ms. Reese and Mr. Langford took seats across from them. A moment later, a housekeeper in a crisp uniform entered to offer water or tea. The twins shook their heads, too uneasy to accept anything. Mr. Langford folded his hands in his lap, regarding them with a measured kindness. "I understand this situation is quite unexpected for you both. We are determined to handle it with discretion and empathy." His voice had a practiced smoothness, as though he dealt with crises every day. Leon's fingers dug into the arm of his chair. "We still don't know if we're even connected to the Hawthorns. We didn't want to come here, but everyone said it was easier than staying in some hotel." Mr. Langford dipped his head. "Entirely understandable. Allow me to explain. The family is aware of the ongoing paternity inquiry. They've taken steps to ensure that if you do happen to be related, you'll receive proper acknowledgement. If you're not, they'll assist you in clearing your travel records so you can move forward." Lillian forced herself to meet the man's gaze. "So you're basically going to keep us here until the final test results come in?" She tried to keep her tone civil, but didn't succeed entirely. He gave a conciliatory smile. "I wouldn't phrase it as keep you here. You're free to come and go as long as you remain reachable. This property is large enough to make your stay comfortable, and it's close to the clinic. It also satisfies official concerns about your whereabouts. You won't be under lock and key." Despite his polite words, Lillian felt as though an invisible cage hovered around them. "And if we agree to stay," she ventured, "what's expected of us?" Mr. Langford's smile softened. "Truly, nothing beyond patience. You may relax, explore, treat it as a temporary home. If at any point you wish to leave, we'll coordinate with the authorities. The family attorney only asks that we maintain open communication." Silence fell. Lillian considered the trade-off. A luxurious cage over a cheap hotel. Neither option sounded appealing, but at least here they might get faster answers, or so Ms. Reese had implied. Leon gave a reluctant nod, which Lillian echoed. "All right," she said finally. "We'll stay, but only until the tests are done." Ms. Reese glanced at Mr. Langford. "If that's settled, I'll inform Ms. Kincaid and the rest of the team. Do you have any luggage beyond your backpacks?" Lillian shook her head. "No, that's it." A flicker of something, sympathy perhaps, touched Ms. Reese's face. Then she checked her phone. "I'll return this afternoon. Bernard, please call me immediately if anything arises." He nodded, standing as Ms. Reese swept from the room. Soon they heard the front doors open and close, leaving them alone in this grand, unfamiliar space. "Let me show you around," Mr. Langford offered gently, guiding them out into a wide corridor with high ceilings. Framed portraits of serious-looking individuals lined the walls, none of whom Lillian recognized. Was one of those painted figures an ancestor? The notion felt surreal. She noticed Leon staring at the portraits, his brow furrowed. Their footsteps echoed on the gleaming hardwood floor as they passed several closed doors, each presumably leading to more tastefully furnished rooms. He led them up a sweeping staircase. On the second floor, he paused before two adjacent doors. "Bedrooms," he said, opening them one by one. "Each has a private bath. You can choose which one you prefer." Lillian stepped into the first room. A canopy bed stood in the center, layered with crisp linens and decorative pillows that looked too expensive to touch. Large windows let in abundant light, and a soft rug covered most of the hardwood. She glanced around, overwhelmed. She'd never stayed anywhere remotely this luxurious. Leon peered in from behind her, similarly taken aback. "Wow," he mumbled. Mr. Langford's voice floated in from the hallway. "If you need anything, clothes, toiletries, let me know. The staff can procure items in your sizes." His polite, formal words only reminded them how far they were from their normal lives. Lillian thanked him quietly, still feeling a swirl of conflicting emotions. In the corridor, Leon asked the question that weighed on both their minds. "Will someone from the Hawthorne family show up here?" Mr. Langford didn't flinch. "It's possible, though not certain. Several members are traveling abroad or tied up in business matters. If the final results indicate you share any direct relation, I imagine you'll meet relevant individuals soon enough." Lillian couldn't tell if that was supposed to be comforting. The very idea of meeting a wealthy, possibly distant father or uncle made her head spin. She mustered a small nod, then watched Mr. Langford descend the stairs. Once alone, the twins retreated to the bedroom with the canopy bed, shutting the door behind them. Leon dropped his backpack on a tufted chair. "This is so weird," he muttered. "It's like we're in a museum or some fancy bed and breakfast. Are we allowed to just live here?" She perched on the bed's edge, feeling how soft the mattress was. "I guess that's the idea," she said. "But I don't know how I'm supposed to act or feel. Part of me wants to open every drawer and see if there's some secret hidden clue. The other part wants to run out the front door and never look back." Leon's shoulders sagged. "Same, but I doubt we'd get far." He rummaged through his backpack, taking stock of how little they owned. "I only have 2 changes of clothes," he muttered, clearly embarrassed. "Plus, we were supposed to be on a short trip. All our good stuff is at home." With a deep sigh, Lillian reached for her phone. Still no messages from their mom. She felt the beginnings of anger swirl in her gut. Anger at the entire situation, at the silence from their mother, at the Hawthorns for forcing this scenario. "I wish we could just talk to her," she said. "Maybe she'd at least confirm some details." Leon exhaled, flopping onto the bed beside her. "Do you think there's any chance we really share blood with these people?" The question hung in the air. Lillian tried to recall every suspicious or confusing moment from childhood. Their mother had always worked 2 jobs, carefully budgeted, and rarely talked about the past. But there had never been a sign that someone wealthy was sending secret support or checking in. If the Hawthorns were so powerful, wouldn't they have discovered the twins sooner? "I don't know," Lillian said finally. "It's just, maybe Mom tried to keep us hidden for a reason. Or maybe it's all a big coincidence and the test will show no direct link." She pressed her lips into a grim line. "Let's not drive ourselves crazy guessing." They decided to explore. After stashing their bags, they slipped into the hallway. The second bedroom was similarly lavish, so they agreed Leon would take that one if they ended up sleeping here for multiple nights. Then they wandered down the corridor, peeking into rooms that weren't locked. One appeared to be a study, with tall shelves of books and a large wooden desk. Another was a smaller lounge, probably intended for private meetings or reading in solitude. Everything gleamed with a sense of deep history: polished banisters, antique light fixtures, and intricately patterned rugs. In that smaller lounge, a wide painting caught Lillian's eye. It depicted a group of people standing in a garden, the men in tailored suits, the women in elegant dresses. She moved closer, scanning their faces. The plaque underneath said simply, Hawthorne Family Garden Party, 1972. Her gut twisted. The line of older men with stern gazes might have been the previous generation. Could one of them be their grandfather? She didn't even know her grandparents' names. Suddenly, it all felt suffocating. She turned away from the painting and left the room. Leon trailed behind her, looking equally rattled. "Let's head downstairs," he suggested. "I'm starving. Maybe Mr. Langford can show us the kitchen, or we can find something on our own." Lillian nodded, relieved at the idea of doing something ordinary like eating. They navigated their way back down, only to find the main foyer empty. The hush in the townhouse was almost eerie. It felt more like a carefully staged set than a living space. They did locate the kitchen eventually, following the faint smell of lemon cleanser. It was modernized, in contrast to the house's vintage charm, with stainless steel appliances and sleek counters. A middle-aged woman was there, wiping down the island. She turned at the sound of footsteps, smiling politely. "Hello, you must be the young Hawthorns." Lillian felt a jolt at that phrasing, but managed a polite nod. "I'm Molly," the woman continued. "I take care of the daily cooking and such. Can I get you something to eat?" Leon shifted uncomfortably. Yes, maybe a sandwich if it's not too much trouble." Molly nodded with warmth. "No trouble at all. There are cold cuts and fresh bread in the fridge." She gestured for them to sit at the breakfast nook. Lillian watched Molly move with practiced efficiency, pulling out ingredients and assembling 2 sandwiches in minutes. The normalcy of it made the entire morning's upheaval feel slightly less suffocating. When Molly served the plates, Lillian thanked her quietly. "We appreciate it." Molly returned a gentle smile. "Of course. If you need anything else, just ring for me. Mr. Langford said you might be here a few days." She then excused herself, leaving them alone in the bright kitchen. The sandwiches tasted better than anything they'd had in a while, though that might have been the result of empty stomachs. Leon devoured his quickly, washing it down with water from the tap. Lillian ate more slowly, her thoughts drifting. "This place is too fancy," she remarked, picking at the crust. "I don't know how to act. I feel like we'll break something." Leon nodded in agreement. "Guess we just try not to think about it. If we keep to ourselves, maybe the time will pass faster." He paused, then added quietly, "I feel like we should do something. Sitting around waiting for tests is driving me nuts." Lillian sighed. "Me too, but what can we do? We have no money, no idea if we'll be forced to stay longer, and no real answers." It was like being in a gilded cage, just as she'd feared. She finished the last bite of her sandwich, forcing herself to accept the reality they were stuck in. "Let's just see what Mr. Langford suggests. Maybe there's a phone number we can use to try to reach Mom again." They cleaned up their plates, uncertain if they should leave them in the sink or risk washing them. Finally, Lillian rinsed them quickly and placed them in the dishwasher, hoping that was acceptable. Then they wandered back into the foyer. A faint murmur of voices drifted from behind a closed door. Lillian gestured for Leon to follow. Her heart gave a small lurch. She recognized Ms. Reese's voice. Maybe they were discussing the new DNA results already. When Lillian inched the door open, she caught sight of Ms. Reese talking to Mr. Langford, their heads bent close in conversation. The tension in Ms. Reese's posture suggested something urgent. Before Lillian or Leon could step fully into the room, Ms. Reese noticed them and straightened abruptly, schooling her face into a neutral expression. "Ah," she said, "there you are. Good timing." Mr. Langford nodded in greeting, but a flicker of concern lingered in his gaze. Lillian's pulse pounded. "Is something wrong?" Ms. Reese exhaled. "We just received a call from Ms. Kincaid." There's been an important development regarding your mother's whereabouts. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends." Ms. Reese's words landed like a thunderbolt, and for a few heartbeats all Lillian could hear was the faint rush of blood in her ears. She and Leon stood in the threshold of the room, gripping the door frame as though it were the only thing keeping them upright. Mr. Langford gave a small, measured nod, then gestured for them to come in and shut the door behind them. Ms. Reese waited until they were closer, before continuing. "Your mother," she said quietly, "has been located in a hospital in Connecticut. She was admitted following an accident." The lawyer paused, letting the statement settle. Lillian felt the floor tilt beneath her, and Leon swayed at her side. "An accident?" Leon repeated, his voice cracking. Is she okay?" Ms. Reese softened her tone. "We don't have all the details, but she's stable and conscious. The doctors say she suffered some injuries that required immediate surgery, but she's past the critical stage." Relief warred with alarm inside Lillian's chest. Their mother was alive, but hurt badly enough to land in the hospital. She glanced at Leon, reading the same maelstrom of emotions in his wide eyes. "Can we go see her?" Lillian asked, her voice quivering. Ms. Reese hesitated. "We've notified Ms. Kincaid. She's coordinating with the hospital staff to confirm your mother's condition and to see if she's able to talk. They're also checking if your mother has any urgent messages for you. Once we have clarity, we can discuss travel arrangements." That answer felt distant and clinical to Leon. He wanted to scream that he didn't care about protocols or clarifications. He just wanted to be by his mother's side. But he swallowed the urge, recognizing that Ms. Reese might be the only person who could help them move quickly. Mr. Langford stepped closer, gently guiding the twins to sit on a small sofa near the window. "I understand this is overwhelming news. Let's take a moment." Lillian sank onto the cushion, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She felt guilty for being so consumed by the Hawthorne puzzle that she hadn't once considered her mother might be in trouble. Leon's breathing was ragged, and he clasped his hands together, knuckles turning white. "Can we call the hospital ourselves?" he asked abruptly. "We don't have to wait for Ms. Kincaid if we have the name and number." Ms. Reese and Mr. Langford exchanged a quick glance. "I'll see what I can do," Ms. Reese said, "but hospital rules on patient privacy can be strict. We need the right contact person, or your mother's consent if she's well enough to speak." Those words sent a spike of frustration through Lillian. She pressed her lips together, refusing to cry in front of these near strangers. "What about us going there directly?" she pushed. "She's our mom. We have a right to see her." Mr. Langford inclined his head. "Certainly under normal circumstances you would. However, given the current hold on your travel and your passport situation, you might need official clearance to leave the city. That said, Ms. Reese is correct. We'll try to expedite it, especially given it's a medical emergency." Leon let out a shuddering breath. "I don't understand," he said. "Are we under arrest or something? Why does it feel like every move we make has to be approved?" Ms. Reese spread her palms in a helpless gesture. "You're not under arrest, but your passport's being flagged at the airport triggered a legal tangle. Combine that with the possibility, still unconfirmed, that you may be related to a very public family, and authorities have become extremely cautious. It's complicated, but I promise you we're doing everything in our power to straighten it out." A tense hush followed. Lillian clenched her teeth, forcing herself to breathe. The knowledge that her mother was lying in a hospital bed, possibly hurting or confused, twisted her insides. It also injected a new sense of urgency into the question of their paternity. Maybe their mother could settle things if only they could see her. She might finally reveal why she'd hidden them all these years, if indeed there was something to hide. The notion of confronting her mother about the Hawthorns felt both cruel and necessary. She needed to focus on her mother's recovery, yet their entire future might hinge on Mom's explanation. Mr. Langford rose, pacing quietly to the other side of the room. "I'll prepare a guest vehicle and speak with Ms. Kincaid," he said, glancing at Ms. Reese. "We can at least be ready to depart if we get the go-ahead. In the meantime, perhaps Lillian and Leon would like some privacy." Ms. Reese agreed. As both adults stepped into the hallway, Leon raked his hands through his hair, letting out a low curse under his breath. "What if she can't talk right now?" he asked Lillian, voice trembling. "What if we never get answers?" Lillian's throat tightened. "One thing at a time," she murmured, though she didn't quite believe the reassurance. "First, let's hope she's going to be okay. We can deal with the rest once we see her." They spent the next hour pacing the foyer, checking their phones, and occasionally glancing at the door in anticipation of Mr. Langford's return. The silence in the townhouse pressed down on them like a heavy blanket. At last, Ms. Reese emerged from a side room, a phone still clutched in her hand. "I have some updates," she said briskly. "Officer Brandt is willing to let you travel to Connecticut, provided you remain in close communication. Since it's a medical emergency, they've agreed you won't be considered a flight risk, but they want you escorted. I will accompany you, along with a representative from the clinic in case any documentation is needed." Relief surged through Leon. He would have balked at the idea of more chaperoning, but the chance to see their mom took priority. Lillian breathed out. "Thank you. When can we leave?" Ms. Reese didn't miss a beat. "As soon as the car is ready, within the hour. Mr. Langford is arranging for your personal items to be secured in case you need to stay overnight. I hope you won't mind traveling light." Both twins shook their heads, anxious to be on the move. A small wave of gratitude pulsed in Lillian's chest. Whatever else Ms. Reese and the Hawthorns were up to, at least they weren't blocking this. True to her word, Ms. Reese had them on the road within the hour, once again in a dark SUV with tinted windows. The driver navigated out of Manhattan, merging onto the highway that would take them up toward Connecticut. Lillian and Leon huddled together in the back seat, each staring at the traffic outside without really seeing it. Ms. Reese sat in the front, immersed in quiet phone conversations. Occasionally, she typed furiously on her laptop. The day's sun had fully risen, bathing the world in a bright, almost harsh light that made Lillian's eyes ache. She dozed fitfully, lulled by the rhythmic hum of the engine. It felt like an eternity before they pulled into the parking lot of the hospital. The building rose before them in a rectangular sprawl, large windows reflecting the midday sky. Ms. Reese exchanged a few words with the driver, then turned to the twins. "I'll direct you inside. We have permission to visit your mother, but please be respectful of hospital guidelines." Her tone was gentler than usual, acknowledging that this was no place for legal theatrics. Inside, the smell of antiseptic and the murmur of hushed conversations wrapped around them. They followed signs toward the wing where, according to Ms. Reese, their mother was staying. Lillian tried not to dwell on the dull, flickering lights and the steady beep of machinery from unseen rooms. Everything about hospitals unnerved her, dredging up old memories of doctors' offices and the sense of vulnerability. At a nurse's station, Ms. Reese checked in with staff. "She's in room 514, one nurse said, pointing down the corridor. "She's awake, though she tires easily." Lillian's pulse pounded as they neared the door. Leon's hand found hers, squeezing tight. For all their differences in moments like this, the twin bond was unbreakable. Ms. Reese hung back, letting them enter first. They slipped into the room, hearts in their throats. Their mother, Sarah Hawthorne, lay propped up on a hospital bed, her right arm in a cast, an IV drip trailing down from a bag overhead. Bruises mottled her cheek and temple, and bandages covered part of her forehead. but when she saw her children, her eyes lit with relief. "Mom," Leon breathed, stepping to her side. Lillian couldn't hold back tears. She reached for her mother's hand, mindful of the tubes. Sarah tried to smile but winced from the effort. "My babies," she croaked, her voice raspy. "Thank goodness you're here." Overwhelmed, the twins pressed close, each murmuring half-formed phrases of worry and relief. Leon wanted to ask 1,000 questions about how she ended up hurt, but he settled for gently hugging the side of her bed, overwhelmed by the simple fact that she was alive. They took a few minutes just to breathe together, exchanging soft words. Finally, Lillian ventured a question. "Mom, what happened? We tried calling. No one answered." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, seeming to gather her thoughts. "I was driving," she managed, headed back to the city after finishing a temp job. It was late, and the roads were slick. The car skidded on a curve. Next thing I knew, paramedics were pulling me out. "I'm sorry." Her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry I worried you." Leon shook his head. "We're just glad you're okay." He refrained from bombarding her with everything that had happened at the airport. But Lillian, struggling with the weight of secrets, couldn't hold back any longer. "Mom," she said softly, "we need to tell you something about the Hawthorne name. TSA stopped us. We never made it to Colorado because they think we might be connected to the billionaire Hawthornes." Sarah's eyes widened and her whole face tensed. It was almost imperceptible, but Lillian saw her mother's grip tighten on the bed railing. Ms. Reese, who had quietly entered behind them, cleared her throat. "Mrs. Hawthorne, or Ms. Hawthorne, my name is Charlotte Reese, the family's legal counsel. I regret bringing legal matters here, but the authorities flagged your children's passports due to a potential link with the Hawthorne estate. We've done preliminary tests and we're awaiting final results." A flicker of panic crossed Sarah's face. She opened her mouth, then stopped, as though searching for safe words. Her gaze darted from Lillian to Leon. I never wanted you two dragged into that world." The statement was laced with regret, and something else, fear perhaps. Leon leaned forward, confusion swirling in his mind. "Mom, does that mean you knew that we might be part of their family?" Sarah closed her eyes in a pained gesture. "It's complicated. I hoped it would never come to this." Lillian's heart hammered, a swirl of disbelief mixing with a jolt of betrayal. "You told us you didn't know our father," she whispered, voice trembling. Sarah's eyes glistened. "I said many things to protect you, and some of them were lies, yes." Silence crushed the room. Ms. Reese stood by, listening intently. Lillian felt her world tilt. She didn't want to condemn her mother, especially now, seeing how frail and hurt she was. But the part of her that had always longed for answers burned with questions. "Which Hawthorne is it, Mom?" Leon asked, his throat tight. "We don't even know who we might belong to." Sarah let out a shaky breath, looking away as though she couldn't bear to see their faces. "Not Wyatt," she said at last. "It's his son, Graham." The name rang in Lillian's ears like a sudden alarm. So that meant they might be grandchildren of Wyatt Hawthorne, heirs or partial heirs in a line that spanned massive wealth. She'd seen references to Graham Hawthorne in a few finance articles, a quiet, somewhat elusive figure compared to his more publicly visible siblings. Her chest constricted. "He never knew about us?" she asked. Sarah exhaled slowly. "Not exactly. He suspected, but I made sure he couldn't confirm." A wave of guilt darkened her expression. "I didn't want that life for you two, and Graham was never the type to fight for fatherhood. So I left." Leon's head reeled. If that was true, if Graham Hawthorne might be their father, everything was about to become infinitely more complicated. Ms. Reese exchanged a meaningful look with Sarah. "We'll need your formal statement," she said gently, "whenever you're up for it." Sarah shut her eyes, clearly overwhelmed. Lillian felt a stab of sympathy. Her mother was injured, recovering from surgery, and now being pressed for confessions. "Let's not do this now," she pleaded, turning to Ms. Reese. "She needs rest." Ms. Reese inclined her head respectfully. "Of course, I'll wait outside." Then she slipped from the room, leaving the three alone. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "I'm so sorry," she murmured again. "I thought I was protecting you from a world that can be cruel. The Hawthorns can be ruthless if they think their empire's threatened. I never wanted you to get caught in their crosshairs." Lillian swallowed, taking her mother's hand more firmly. "We believe you, but it's too late now. TSA flagged us and Ms. Reese is pushing for all these tests. We can't just walk away." Sarah's face contorted with pain and regret. "I know. Once they latch on to the possibility of more heirs, they won't let go until they have proof. Graham especially. He might act uninterested, but he'll want control once he realizes you exist." Leon bristled at that. "Control? We're not property. We're just—" He trailed off, racked by confusion and fury. Sarah squeezed his hand, her own tears falling freely now. "I wish I could change it, but I can't. Maybe it won't be all bad. Maybe he'll step up in ways I never imagined." Lillian struggled to absorb the storm of revelations. Here was the missing father they'd never known, tied to an influential dynasty that might open doors or slam them shut. The weight of it pressed on her lungs like a tightening vice. She touched her mother's shoulder, 1,000 unspoken questions swirling in her mind. "We'll figure it out," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "But first, you focus on getting better. We'll handle the Hawthorns and Ms. Reese in the meantime." Sarah looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and heartbreak. "Thank you. You two have always been stronger than I ever was. I love you both." They huddled together in that sterile hospital room, a broken family facing the looming specter of a powerful clan that might either embrace them or tear them apart. Beyond the walls, the hum of hospital machinery and the shuffle of nurses seemed distant. The only thing that mattered was that mother and children were reunited, however briefly, before the next wave of uncertainty crashed over them. Lillian closed her eyes, wondering how they would emerge from this tangled mess, yet she also felt a spark of determination. If the Hawthorns wanted to unearth hidden heirs, they were about to discover that these twins wouldn't be pushed around without a fight. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. Leon slipped out of the hospital room first, driven by a swirl of emotions he could no longer contain. The hallway lights buzzed overhead, and the faint smell of antiseptic followed him everywhere, but all he could think about was the name on his mother's lips, Graham Hawthorne. He paused by a window overlooking the parking lot below, trying to steady his breathing. Even though his mother was safe for the moment, bandaged and bruised but conscious, his chest still felt tight, as if the weight of the entire Hawthorne legacy was pressing down on him. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass and closed his eyes. A moment later, Lillian joined him. She didn't speak right away, only rested a hand on his shoulder. Through the glass, they could see Ms. Reese in the lot, apparently on a phone call, her gestures sharp and purposeful. Everything in their lives seemed orchestrated by outside forces now, and that realization made Leon's stomach churn. "You okay?" Lillian finally asked in a quiet voice. Leon let out a shaky exhale. "I don't know. Mom's in there, half-conscious, telling us we have a father who might not even want us. Or maybe he does want us, but only to control our lives." Lillian rubbed his arm gently. "I'm just as freaked out as you are," she admitted. They fell silent again. Through the corridor, a few nurses passed by, their squeaking shoes echoing in the hush. Leon forced himself to recall the conversation in the hospital room. Their mother had looked so small in that bed, her face wan and her words laced with regret. She'd confirmed a suspicion that was more than a decade old. Graham Hawthorne might have fathered the twins, but he'd never been part of their lives. Lillian's mind was on a parallel track, thinking about how this news changed everything she once believed about herself. She'd spent years quietly wondering about their dad, convincing herself he was just an average guy who hadn't stuck around. Now the truth threatened to catapult them into the center of a powerful family drama. Ms. Reese entered the hospital through the sliding doors again and spotted the twins by the window. Her heels clicked against the tile as she approached, face calm, but eyes filled with tension. "I just spoke with Mr. Langford," she said. "He's relayed what your mother told you about Graham. We'll need confirmation, of course, but given the context, it makes sense." Leon stepped back from the window, crossing his arms. "What do you mean it makes sense?" Ms. Reese's expression flickered. "We ran some genealogical checks as part of the standard process. There were hints that pointed toward one of Wyatt Hawthorne's children, most likely Graham. Your mother's statement lines up with those indications." Lillian's heart thumped. "So, does he know yet?" she asked, feeling a cold prickle of dread. The lawyer paused. "We informed the wider Hawthorne circle that there might be new family members. Graham was traveling for business, but he's been briefed. I expect he'll want to meet you soon." She paused, voice gentling. "I realize this is an emotional time. Please know I'm not trying to rush you. But the family is quite direct in these matters." Leon let out a short laugh that held no humor. "Right, direct, which means they snap their fingers and everything shifts around them." Ms. Reese didn't deny it. She seemed to search for a kinder approach. "Your mother is stable, but the doctors say she needs rest. Once you've finished visiting her, I suggest we return to the townhouse. If you're willing, I can arrange for a conversation with Graham. Nothing binding, just an introduction. That might help all of us figure out next steps, especially with the official paternity testing and your current travel restrictions." Every part of Lillian recoiled at the idea of meeting a man who'd evidently never cared enough to seek them out on his own. Yet part of her also acknowledged that avoiding him wouldn't change the situation. She glanced at Leon. "Should we at least hear him out?" Leon's jaw tensed, but he gave a stiff nod. "I guess so. But not today, okay? I can't handle that on top of everything else." Ms. Reese's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Understood. I'll tell Mr. Langford to hold off for a day or two. In the meantime, if your mother's well enough, you can ask her any questions. She might be the best source of clarity." Lillian agreed, though it pained her to think of pressing Sarah for answers when she was so vulnerable. "I just want her to recover," she murmured. "We all do," Ms. Reese said softly. "Take the time you need." Back in the hospital room, Sarah dozed fitfully, her face etched with discomfort. A nurse passed by, adjusting the IV drip and checking vital signs. Lillian and Leon stayed quiet, each mired in their own thoughts. Eventually, Sarah stirred, blinking sleepily. She saw them and tried to muster a small smile. "Still here?" she said, voice hoarse. "We're not going anywhere," Leon replied, pulling a chair closer to the bed. Lillian stood by the bed's railing. She couldn't hold back anymore. "Mom," she said, "Ms. Reese mentioned Graham might want to meet us soon. Should we?" Sarah squeezed her eyes shut for a moment. "He'll come," she whispered. "If he knows you might be his children, he won't ignore that. But be careful. He can be charming one minute and distant the next. He's no monster, but he lives in a world with its own rules." Leon's hands curled into fists on his lap. "Why didn't you tell him from the start? He might have helped. You wouldn't have had to work so many jobs." He didn't say it accusingly, but the pain in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah exhaled shakily. "Graham wasn't ready for fatherhood, and I was scared. All I'd seen from the Hawthornes was wealth used as a weapon. Once you two came along, I decided I'd rather struggle than let them control our lives. Maybe I was wrong, but I hope to shield you." The old resentment and new sympathy warred inside Lillian's heart. She understood a mother wanting to protect her children, but she also ached for the years of fatherly presence they'd missed. She placed a hand on Sarah's bandaged arm, careful not to hurt her. "We just need you to be honest now. Please, no more half-truths." Sarah nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I promise. If you want to know something, I'll tell you." Leon swallowed hard. "Then tell us, if Graham finds out for sure we're his kids, will he try to fight for custody or something? We're almost 16, but I don't know how any of that works." Sarah hesitated. "He might try to bring you into the family fold. Custody battles are rare in your age bracket, but with that kind of power, anything's possible. The Hawthorns can be unpredictable when it comes to heirs." A chill traveled the length of Lillian's spine. "Heirs," she repeated, the word tasting foreign. "That's what we are to them, potential pieces of their empire." Sarah's face crumpled. "I never wanted you to be seen that way. You're so much more." Leon was about to respond when the nurse re-entered and shooed them aside with a gentle command, explaining that Sarah needed to rest. The conversation paused under the nurse's watchful eye, and Lillian took that as a cue to give her mother some space. She gently squeezed Sarah's hand. "We'll be back soon. Try to sleep, okay?" Sarah nodded weakly, eyes fluttering shut as medication and fatigue pulled her under. Lillian and Leon stepped into the hallway. Ms. Reese appeared a moment later as though summoned by an invisible signal. "You two look exhausted," she observed. "Why don't we drive back to Manhattan? You can return to the townhouse, gather yourselves. We can check in with the hospital by phone throughout the evening. And if your mother stabilizes, we'll arrange another visit tomorrow." Leon hesitated. A big part of him wanted to stay right here, to watch over their mother in case she stirred again. But he knew that he couldn't camp out in the hallway indefinitely. "Okay," he said, resigned. "We'll come back tomorrow morning." Ms. Reese nodded and led them back toward the parking lot, her presence an ever-constant reminder of the new life that had snared them. As they left the hospital, Lillian glanced back at the building, wondering if they'd find it changed the next time they arrived. She said a silent prayer for her mother's healing, then slid into the car. The drive back was subdued. Neither twin spoke. Ms. Reese fielded phone calls in hushed tones, providing short, clipped updates to Mr. Langford. When they finally reached the townhouse, the sun was dipping low, painting the street in long shadows. Lillian's muscles felt leaden as she climbed the steps. The townhouse door opened at once, revealing Mr. Langford, whose expression managed to be both empathetic and carefully composed. "Welcome back," he said. "Any improvement in your mother's condition?" Lillian nodded wearily. "She's awake, talking at least. Still recovering." Mr. Langford murmured his relief, then cleared his throat. "I've taken the liberty of having dinner prepared, should you want it." Leon's stomach growled, reminding him that they hadn't eaten much all day. A reluctant gratitude filled him. "Thanks," he mumbled. They ended up in a small dining area near the kitchen, not the grand hall used for formal events. It was quieter there. Molly, the housekeeper, served them soup and fresh bread along with glasses of water. She didn't ask any questions, only offered a warm, motherly smile. Lillian and Leon ate quickly, half out of hunger, half out of exhaustion. Each spoonful of soup steadied them a little, warming the hollow pit in their stomachs. After dinner, Ms. Reese excused herself to speak privately with Mr. Langford about family matters. The twins drifted upstairs, where each had a bedroom waiting. For a while, they sat on the rug in Lillian's room, leaning against the foot of the bed. Neither wanted to separate just yet, though the day had drained them. A single lamp cast a soft glow, illuminating their worried faces. "Everything changed so fast," Leon murmured. "It's like we're living someone else's life." Lillian nodded, picking idly at the edge of the rug. I keep thinking about that name, Graham Hawthorne. He might be our father, but we never even heard his voice. I don't know if I can handle meeting him. Leon closed his eyes, letting his head rest against the bed frame. At least we have each other, he said. I don't trust anyone else. They finally parted, each retreating to get ready for bed. Lillian brushed her teeth in a bathroom that felt more luxurious than her entire apartment back home. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror and paused. Could she see traces of a Hawthorne relative in her own features? She didn't know. Her eyes, shaped like her mother's, stared back with unspoken questions. She flicked off the light and stepped into the bedroom, her nerves still taut. Sleep felt elusive, but the day's emotional weight battered her. When she finally lay down, her head sank into pillows that felt like clouds. It should have been comforting, but guilt gnawed at her. Sarah was stuck in a hospital bed alone and in pain, while the twins found themselves in privileged surroundings. Meanwhile, on the floor below, Ms. Reese spoke with Mr. Langford in hushed, urgent tones. Graham will arrive in New York within 48 hours, Ms. Reese said. He insists on meeting the twins as soon as possible. Mr. Langford rubbed his chin thoughtfully. They aren't ready. Today was already too much for them. Ms. Reese nodded. I'm aware, but Graham is a Hawthorne through and through. Once he sets his mind on something. She let the thought trail off, and Mr. Langford gave a slight frown. We'll proceed carefully. I'll do what I can to ease the tension. They parted ways, leaving the townhouse quiet, but bristling with unspoken tension. Upstairs, Lillian couldn't fully drift to sleep. She lay there, eyes closed, body still, but her thoughts darted between images of her mother's pale face and the looming question of how a father she'd never met would react to their existence. Leon, in his own bedroom, stared at the ceiling, replaying every word Sarah had shared in the hospital. He hated the possibility that Graham might see them as assets or burdens rather than children. At the same time, some small, hidden part of him ached with curiosity. What if, against all odds, Graham welcomed them? When morning finally came, it brought no clarity, just another day of waiting. The townhouse bustled with subdued efficiency. Staff tidied rooms, prepared breakfast, and maintained a polite distance. Over scrambled eggs and toast, Leon studied Lillian's tired face, noticing the dark circles under her eyes. You sleep at all? He asked. She shook her head, swallowing a mouthful of food. Barely. You? He shrugged. Not really. They both looked up as Mr. Langford entered the dining area, ready to inform them of the next steps. But before he could speak, Ms. Reese appeared, phone in hand and eyebrows lifted. She glanced at the twins and pressed her lips into a thin line. I just spoke with Graham's office, she said. He landed early. He wants a meeting as soon as possible. Leon and Lillian froze, their stomachs lurching in unison. The moment they'd dreaded had arrived far sooner than they'd hoped. Today? Lillian managed, her voice shaking. Ms. Reese nodded. He's heading this way, I'm sorry. I know it's abrupt, but it's how Graham operates. We can push back if you're truly not prepared. Leon exchanged a glance with Lillian. They both knew stalling would only prolong the inevitable. It's fine, Leon finally said, though his expression revealed his nerves. Let's just get it over with. Ms. Reese dipped her head in acknowledgement. Understood. I'll arrange for a quiet, private setting so it won't feel too intimidating. A sense of unreality washed over Lillian. She felt as though she were watching a movie of her own life. In mere hours, she would come face to face with the man who might be her father. Would she see her own features mirrored in his eyes? Would he even care about their existence beyond the obligations of wealth and lineage? She took a shuddering breath and finished her breakfast, hardly tasting a thing. One way or another, they were finally going to get answers. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. Leon tugged at the collar of the clean shirt he'd borrowed from the townhouse staff, feeling like he was dressed for an event he never wanted to attend. The fabric was crisp, pressed with such precision that every crease felt alien. Standing in front of a full-length mirror in the upstairs bedroom, he studied his reflection. He looked both younger and older at once, caught between a child's fear and an adult's anxiety. Across the hallway, Lillian also changed clothes, struggling to adjust to a blouse that felt too smooth against her skin. They had both refused anything overtly fancy, settling on simple but tidy outfits. Even so, the knowledge that they were about to meet Graham Hawthorne loomed over everything, making each movement stiff with tension. When they came downstairs, Mr. Langford waited in the foyer, his posture impeccable and his expression somber. "He's arrived," Mr. Langford said quietly. "He's in the drawing room. We can do introductions whenever you're ready." The twins exchanged a look. Ready was the last thing they felt, but stalling would only make it worse. Leon took a shaky breath, and Lillian squared her shoulders. "Let's go," she murmured. They followed Mr. Langford down a wide hallway, the ornate rugs muffling their steps. Light from tall windows spilled across the polished floor, but Lillian barely registered the townhouse's beauty anymore. All she could see was the image in her mind of a wealthy stranger who might be her father. She wondered if she'd recognize any trace of him in her own features or Leon's. At the door to the drawing room, Mr. Langford paused, gave a slight nod, then pushed the heavy wooden panel open. The three of them stepped inside. A man stood with his back to them, glancing out the tall windows that overlooked the garden. He wore a tailored suit the color of midnight, his posture ramrod straight, a posture that gave off a contained intensity even from behind. Ms. Reese, seated in a chair off to one side, rose immediately upon the twins' entrance. At the sound of footsteps, the man turned. He had angular features, neatly trimmed dark hair that was just beginning to show flecks of silver, and a pair of eyes that seemed to pierce whatever they looked at. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The man, Graham Hawthorne, let his gaze move across Leon first, then Lillian, studying them as though seeing fragments of himself in their faces. Mr. Langford cleared his throat. "Mr. Graham Hawthorne," he said softly, "this is Leon and Lillian." Graham's stare lingered another moment before he offered a polite, measured nod. "Hello," he said. His voice was deep and controlled, with a hint of hesitation behind the formality. The twins stood rigid, unsure how to respond. Lillian clutched her hands together so tightly that her knuckles paled, while Leon swallowed, trying to keep his composure. He didn't bother to force a greeting. The tension in the room felt like it could snap at any second. Graham shifted his weight, slipping both hands into his pockets. "Shall we sit?" Ms. Reese suggested, gesturing toward a small seating area arranged in a semicircle. After a loaded pause, Lillian and Leon perched on one couch, and Graham took the armchair opposite them. A low wooden table separated them, as though providing a fragile barrier. Ms. Reese and Mr. Langford stayed near the edges of the room, observers of an intensely private moment. A long breath escaped Graham, and in that exhalation, Leon sensed the man's attempt to soften his demeanor. I'm not sure where to start," Graham admitted. His eyes flicked over the twins again, as if he still couldn't believe they were real. "If all of this is true, if you're my children, then I've lost a lot of years." Lillian's stomach twisted, the wave of conflicting emotions making her voice come out harsher than she intended. "Did you really not know about us? Mom said you might have suspected." The man's gaze turned sharp, then wavered. "I suspected, yes," he acknowledged. Your mother made it clear she didn't want me in the picture. We had a falling out, and when she told me she was pregnant, I offered help. But she disappeared soon after. His expression tightened with something like regret. I made attempts to find her, but she was gone. Leon felt a spark of anger. Maybe you didn't try hard enough, he snapped. He had always imagined that a real father would move mountains to find them. If Graham hadn't managed to locate them, how much had he cared? A muscle twitched in Graham's jaw. I'm not proud of the past, he said curtly. I was younger, selfish, too focused on building my own company. After Sarah left, I wasn't sure if she'd decided to raise the child on her own or do something else. Over time, I convinced myself it might have been a false alarm. He paused, exhaling slowly. I see now how wrong I was. Silence weighed heavily as the twins absorbed his words. Was it possible that both their mother and Graham had done their best, just badly and with too many mistakes? Or was one party more at fault than the other? Lillian's throat felt tight. She said she didn't want us caught up with the Hawthorns' power plays, she muttered. Graham's lips thinned. Yes, that sounds like her. She hated the way my family wielded influence. But did that mean she should rob me of a chance to be a father? He didn't raise his voice, but the hurt in his tone was evident. Leon tried to imagine a life where Graham had been around from the start. Would they have grown up in comfort instead of scraping by for rent? He shot a quick glance at Lillian, who looked equally torn. Leon spoke into the silence. Well, we're here now, he said flatly. So, what do you want from us? A loaded question, but it demanded an answer. Graham rubbed a hand over his face, for the first time letting slip a glimpse of real vulnerability. I want to know you, he said. If the tests confirm what we suspect, then I am your father. We've lost 15 years. Maybe there's still a chance to make up for some of that. Lillian felt tears prick the back of her eyes. She didn't want to be moved by Graham's earnestness, but the words struck a chord. At the same time, she couldn't forget what Sarah had said about Hawthorns exerting control. What does knowing us look like? She asked softly. We have a life of our own, a mother who's hurt and in the hospital. Graham swallowed, nodding. I understand. I'd like to help, however I can. If your mother needs medical support, specialized care, anything, I can make it happen. She may not want it from me, but I'd be willing to provide it. Leon snorted quietly, unable to hide his skepticism. Throw money at the problem, right? The remark was biting, but it seemed to make Graham pause, his expression flickering with guilt. That's not my intention, he said, measured and calm. But I do have resources, and I'd feel better if I could use them. You might not see it as genuine, but it's the only way I know how to fix what's been broken. A standoff of silence followed, each side waiting for the other to yield. Then Lillian spoke up, voice shaking. Mom says you and the rest of your family can be ruthless about heirs. She was afraid we'd get turned into pawns in some business empire. Is that what this is about? Graham's eyes hardened. Did your mother also mention the lengths she went to in order to keep me away? There's a lot of blame to go around, but no, this isn't about pawns, it's about my children. The raw sincerity in his final words made Lillian's chest tighten. She wanted to believe him, even though something told her she had to remain cautious. Okay, she said, voice barely above a whisper. But understand this. We don't care about the Hawthorne Empire. We care about our mother's recovery. That's what matters right now. Graham nodded, a spark of compassion illuminating his eyes. I can respect that. Let me help. Anything you need, arranging specialists, covering medical bills, just say the word. Leon clenched his jaw, torn between distrust and a desperate desire to see Sarah healed without financial worry. We'll Think about it, he managed. We're not making any promises. A look passed between Lillian and Leon, unspoken agreement that they wouldn't be rushed. Graham seemed to notice. He drew a measured breath, then glanced at Ms. Reese and Mr. Langford, who had remained silent observers. Perhaps we should give you a bit of space, he told the twins, standing up. I'm staying nearby for the week. If you want to meet again, you can reach me through Ms. Reese. I'd like to visit Sarah, too, if she'll allow it. The mention of visiting Sarah raised Lillian's defenses again. She wasn't sure how her mother would react to seeing Graham after all these years, but that bridge would have to be crossed eventually. We'll talk to her, Lillian said, which was the best she could offer. Leon rose as well, meeting Graham's gaze. In that moment, he couldn't help searching for some physical similarity. Their eyes were shaped differently, but there was a subtle resemblance in the line of Graham's jaw and the arc of his brows. It sent a shiver of confusion through Leon. Without another word, Graham gave a respectful tilt of his head and walked out, Ms. Reese trailing behind. Lillian and Leon slumped back onto the couch, each grappling with the fallout of that encounter. Mr. Langford lingered at the edge of the room, then approached gently. That was intense, he acknowledged. Would you like something to eat or drink? A moment alone? They both shook their heads, too overwhelmed to focus on mundane needs. Lillian glanced at her brother. We should call the hospital soon, check on Mom, she said. Leon rubbed his eyes, nodding. Yeah. Mr. Langford discreetly left, giving them privacy. The drawing room silence felt oppressive now, the heavy drapes and antique furniture looming. Lillian's chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths as she reviewed Graham's words in her mind. He claimed he'd tried to find them. He sounded genuinely pained at the lost years. Was that the whole story, or just a polished version of the truth? Leon hunched forward, elbows on his knees. He seemed different than I expected, he admitted. Not so arrogant, more like tired, conflicted. Lillian nodded slowly. I know, it's almost easier to hate him if he's a typical rich jerk. But he's not, at least not on the surface. She stood, pacing to the window. I can't believe we've actually met him now. Leon rose too, joining her at the glass. Down below, in the townhouse's courtyard, Ms. Reese spoke to Graham near a sleek black car. They seemed to be in earnest discussion, and just before Graham climbed into the vehicle, he looked up, as though sensing the twins' presence in the window. For the briefest second, his eyes met Leon's. Leon froze, unsure whether to wave or look away. In that hesitation, Graham nodded once, an acknowledgement, a silent attempt at connection, and then slid into the car, which pulled away from the curb. The two siblings stood at the window, a strange ache forming in their chests. They had spent a lifetime not knowing this man, and now they couldn't guess whether they wanted him gone or wanted him to stay. Eventually, Lillian tore her gaze from the courtyard. Let's call the hospital, she said, her voice thick. They moved together to find Mr. Langford, who promised they could use the landline in the study for a clearer connection. As they walked, Lillian felt Leon's hand briefly brush against hers in a rare gesture of comfort. They might have a father now, but they still only trusted each other. And with the swirl of new revelations and old betrayals, that bond felt more vital than ever. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. Leon lifted the old-fashioned telephone receiver in the study, his pulse thudding in his ears. The room smelled of furniture polish and distant lavender, a strangely comforting aroma in the midst of their anxiety. Lillian stood by his side, peering at a slip of paper Mr. Langford had given her with the hospital's direct line. She read out the numbers, and Leon punched them in carefully. A faint static hummed in his ear, then a series of rings. Every second made his heart pound harder, fueled by the swirl of emotions and questions left over from their meeting with Graham Hawthorne. "St. Mary's Hospital, front desk," a crisp voice answered. Leon introduced himself, asked for Sarah Hawthorne's room, and was transferred to the nursing station on her floor. The nurse on duty recognized their names immediately. "Your mother is still stable," she said warmly. "She had a decent night, though she's been experiencing some pain. Would you like me to hand her the phone?" Leon's grip on the receiver tightened. "Yes, please." A bit of clattering followed, then a soft shuffle. Sarah's voice, still raspy, came through the line. "Leon? Lil?" Lillian leaned in so she could hear as well. "Mom," Leon said, relief flooding him despite the tension. "How are you?" Sarah exhaled, clearly wincing. "I'm managing. The doctors say I need more rest, but at least I'm off the heavier meds." She paused, catching her breath. "How did everything go with Graham?" Lillian exchanged a glance with Leon, remembering their father's measured tone and the hidden emotion behind his words. "It was hard," Lillian admitted. "He wants to help, says he's sorry about all the years he missed." She heard Sarah sigh on the other end, a sound laced with sorrow and resignation. "He's always been good at apologies, though I'm sure he genuinely regrets it now. Did he mention coming to see me?" Leon nodded, though Sarah couldn't see him. "He said he wants to visit, but only if you're comfortable." A hollow laugh escaped Sarah. "I don't even know what comfort means anymore. But if he wants to come, I won't stop him. Maybe it's time we faced each other." The significance of her words reverberated in Leon's mind. It felt as if every conversation they had would reshape their relationships in ways they couldn't predict. "We can be there too if you want," he offered. Sarah hesitated, then murmured, "Yes, I'd like that. But let's give it a day or so. Let me get a bit stronger." They promised to visit soon, exchanging tender goodbyes before the nurse took the phone from Sarah's hand. After hanging up, Leon and Lillian stood there, momentarily lost in thought. A sense of relief about their mother's progress warred with dread over the upcoming family confrontation. When they emerged from the study, Mr. Langford appeared in the corridor as though summoned by their footsteps. He asked after Sarah's condition, nodding with calm sympathy at their report. "In that case," he said, "we'll be prepared to take you back to Connecticut whenever you're ready. And if Graham wishes to accompany you, we can coordinate that as well." Leon shook his head. "Let's hold off on Graham for the next visit. Mom needs to build her strength, and we need time to process all this." Mr. Langford inclined his head. "Understood. In the meantime, if you need anything, I'm at your disposal." He glanced toward a tall window where sunlight streamed in. "Why don't you both try to get some fresh air? It's a lovely day, and this townhouse can feel stifling after a while." The idea of escaping the townhouse, even briefly, appealed to Lillian. She glanced at Leon, who gave a small nod. They followed Mr. Langford to the entryway, where he handed them light jackets from a hall closet. "Just let security know if you plan to wander far," he advised. "We'd like to keep track of you in case Ms. Kincaid or Ms. Reese needs anything." Lillian bristled at the notion of being constantly monitored, but she couldn't deny her eagerness to get outside. "Sure," she said, trying to keep her voice polite. Stepping onto the sidewalk, they inhaled the crisp spring air. Car engines rumbled, and pedestrians bustled by with grocery bags or dog leashes. For a moment it felt surreal that life continued so normally while theirs had flipped upside down. "Where do you want to go?" Leon asked. Lillian shrugged, scanning the street. "Anywhere that's not stuck inside four walls." They settled on walking toward a nearby park. According to a quick search on Lillian's phone, it was only a few blocks away. They strode in relative silence, each lost in thought. Sometimes they caught glimpses of a man in a suit standing at a discreet distance, likely Hawthorne security. Neither mentioned it, but both felt the tug of annoyance and caution. The park was small but welcoming, with a winding path and benches beneath budding trees. Squirrels darted through patches of grass, and a few children chased each other around the swings. Finding an unoccupied bench, the twins sat down, letting the city's background noise soothe them. Leon spoke first, voice low. "I don't know how to feel about him, Graham, I mean. Part of me is furious that he didn't push harder to find us, but another part..." He trailed off, eyes on the small playground ahead. Lillian understood. "Another part wants what we never had," she finished. "A father who actually cares. Maybe we shouldn't hate him before we know everything." She rested her elbows on her knees, leaning forward. "But I can't just erase all the pain Mom went through. Whether or not she made the right call, we all suffered." Leon picked at a loose thread on the bench. "I wonder if we'll ever get a straight story. Everybody has their version. Mom, Graham, maybe the rest of the Hawthorns. Even Ms. Reese is spinning it in some legal framework." Lillian considered that. "We might not ever know the absolute truth, but we can at least see who Graham is now. If he's sincere, maybe we can find some sort of middle ground." They fell quiet, watching a toddler run giggling from her father, who pretended to chase her around a tree. The image caused a pang of envy in both of them. How different might their lives have been if Graham had been there when they were that small, teaching them to ride bikes or telling them bedtime stories. That life seemed as impossible as a fairy tale, yet the ache remained. After a while, they decided to wander deeper into the park. They strolled past a small pond where ducks paddled leisurely, occasionally quacking at passing strollers. Lillian tried to let the peaceful scene soak in, to remind herself that not everything was chaos. Leon checked his phone, noticing it was nearly lunchtime. "Want to grab something cheap to eat?" he asked, as if they were back in their old routine. Lillian nodded enthusiastically. She spotted a modest food truck parked at the park's edge, selling hot dogs and sodas. The two ambled over, placing their orders. As they waited, Lillian fumbled for cash in her backpack, only to realize she had precious little left. They'd expected to be in Colorado by now, not stuck in Manhattan without a plan. While rummaging, she felt the crisp edges of an envelope Ms. Reese had handed them the previous night. Some spending money provided for convenience, courtesy of the Hawthorne estate. Lillian had set it aside, unsettled by the idea of taking their money. But with no other immediate option, she opened it and found several $20 bills. She glanced at Leon, uncertain. He sighed. "Well, guess we're stuck taking their help for now. Doesn't mean we owe them our souls." Reluctantly, Lillian used one of the 20s to pay for the hot dogs and drinks. The taste was nothing special, but eating under the open sky, away from the townhouse's tension, offered a tiny respite. They chatted about mundane topics. Some show Lillian had been binging, the weird new sandwich shop near their apartment, trying to forget, if just for a moment, the looming Hawthorne saga. But the wait returned swiftly when Lillian's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from Ms. Reese. "When possible, please return. An update from the hospital." Lillian's heart skipped. She showed Leon the text and he paled. Without finishing their food, they hurried out of the park, ignoring the slight protest in their tired legs. The same discreet security person trailed them at a distance. The walk back felt longer, each block stretching with uncertainty about what the update might be. They found Ms. Reese waiting in the foyer, phone in hand. Her face looked composed but serious. "Your mother is asking for you," she told them. "She's all right, but she's become very anxious about the possibility of Graham visiting without you there. The hospital staff recommended a calmer environment if a meeting takes place." Leon exhaled. We plan to see her tomorrow. Does she need us sooner? Ms. Reese glanced down at her phone. She asked if you could come this evening. Graham also called me saying he wants to visit your mother directly. I informed him that might not be wise without your mother's consent. He claims he'll hold off until she's ready. Lillian's pulse throbbed with tension. We'll go tonight then, she said. I don't want her to worry alone. Ms. Reese nodded. We'll prepare the vehicle right away. She turned to a waiting staff member, who nodded and disappeared. Should we let Graham know? Ms. Reese asked carefully. Leon shook his head, already climbing the stairs to grab his things. Not yet. Let's talk to Mom first. The drive back to the hospital was marked by a grim determination. Neither twin said much, their thoughts locked on Sarah's welfare and what new challenges might arise. Upon arrival, they hurried through the corridors until they reached room 514. A nurse recognized them and guided them in. Sarah was propped up against pillows, looking slightly better, though still wan. Relief flickered in her eyes when she saw them. Thank you for coming, she breathed. She explained that she'd been tense all day, worrying that Graham might show up unannounced. I'm not ready to see him on my own, she admitted. I don't mind eventually, but not until I'm stronger. I just needed you two close. Leon took a seat by the bed, gently placing a hand on her forearm. We won't let him just barge in. Lillian nodded, resisting a surge of anger at Graham for putting Sarah in this state of worry, even if he hadn't meant to. They chatted for a while, mostly about mundane things, hospital food, the progress of Sarah's recovery, some mild gossip about the temp job she'd been working. The conversation eventually circled back to Graham, as if drawn by a magnetic pull. Sarah studied her children's faces. So what did you think of him? She asked softly. Lillian shared a hesitant glance with Leon, then shrugged. He was not as arrogant as we expected. Kind of sad, actually. Like he really regrets everything. Leon nodded. He offered to pay for your medical costs or anything else you need. Sarah's brows tightened. Of course he did. Yet instead of the usual scorn, a flicker of softness touched her features. Maybe I should let him, but my pride's still fighting me. If it benefits you two, though, I won't stand in the way. They stayed until visiting hours ended, reluctant to leave Sarah's side. While returning to the car, Lillian asked Ms. Reese, if Mom wants a controlled meeting with Graham, can you arrange that without surprising her? Ms. Reese gave a quick nod. Absolutely. She can designate the time and place. I'll coordinate it all. Leon fiddled with his phone, quietly hating that every step seemed to require a negotiation. Yet he recognized they were in uncharted territory, surrounded by lawyers and guardians, with Ms. Kincaid and Officer Brandt still in the background. Before climbing into the SUV, he glanced at Lillian, both of them feeling the same question lurking in their hearts. Would reuniting with Graham truly heal old wounds or open new ones? The ride back to the townhouse glowed with streetlights and headlights reflected across the windows, painting distorted patterns of orange and white. Inside the car, Ms. Reese sat poised, tapping away at her phone with quiet efficiency. The faint hum of the engine seemed to amplify the twins' unsettled thoughts. When they reached the townhouse, it felt like stepping into a museum after closing hours, hushed, stately, and vaguely oppressive. The staff had dinner prepared, but Lillian and Leon ate only enough to curb hunger. Their minds were still in that hospital room, imagining their mother's fragile state. Late that night, Lillian couldn't sleep. She sat by the window in her borrowed bedroom, staring at the shimmering skyline in the distance. If things were different, she might have been excited to be in this part of the city, impressed by the grandeur of the townhouse. Instead, every marble column and antique painting reminded her how far from normal her life had spun. Down the hall, Leon also lay awake, scrolling absently on his phone, rechecking old photos of their childhood for any clue or sign they might have missed. Neither found any comfort. They'd crossed a threshold into the Hawthorne orbit, and nothing would ever be the same again. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. Sunlight poured in through the tall windows of the Hawthorne townhouse's second floor, but Leon felt no warmth from it. He stood in the hallway, hands shoved into his borrowed jacket pockets, absorbing Mr. Langford's latest update. Apparently, Graham had reached out again, proposing a quiet meeting at the hospital whenever Sarah felt ready. Leon's jaw tightened at the reminder that everything in their lives now turned on a single axis: one man's decision to step in or step away, and the twins' shaky willingness to let him. A wave of fatigue pressed at his eyes, born from too many nights of restless half-sleep. Lillian emerged from her room, dark circles visible beneath her eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a hastily tied knot, as though she'd stopped caring about how it looked. Yet despite the tiredness, her gaze held that determined spark Leon knew so well. She joined him by the railing overlooking the foyer below. The muted bustle of staff drifted upward, a door closing, footsteps crossing marble floors, and the faint clink of dishes being washed in the kitchen. This grand place was beginning to feel almost normal in its routines, but the twins weren't fooled. At any moment, another tidal wave of revelation or complication could sweep in. "Did Mr. Langford say what time Graham was thinking of going?" Lillian asked, crossing her arms. Leon shook his head. "Just that Graham's schedule is flexible, and he's waiting for word from us. He's supposedly clearing the day for it." Lillian suppressed a mirthless laugh. Clearing his day to meet the woman he left behind for 15 years. Generous. Before Leon could respond, Ms. Reese's voice drifted from the stairs. "Good morning," she called up to them, her tone cautious. "I heard you two were awake. May I come up?" Lillian and Leon exchanged a glance. They shrugged, giving silent permission, and Ms. Reese ascended, clutching a slim leather folder. "I just got off the phone with Sarah's nurse," she explained. "Your mother is feeling a bit stronger this morning and is open to seeing Graham, but she wants to do it at the hospital with you two present." A tension formed in the space between them. Lillian wrestled with relief that their mother felt well enough to meet Graham, and dread over being caught in the middle. "Did you talk to Graham about it yet?" Leon asked, folding his arms. Ms. Reese nodded. "He's aware. He's also aware that if Sarah changes her mind last minute, we'll respect that." She paused, then said more gently, "I know you're both worried about your mother. If this is too much for her, we can postpone." The twins exchanged glances, remembering how Sarah had insisted she didn't want Graham blindsiding her. But last night she'd said she was ready to face him with the kids at her side, no more running. Lillian let out a slow breath. "We'll ask her ourselves," she said. "We're going there anyway." Ms. Reese handed them the folder she'd been carrying. Inside is all the information about transportation, plus a letter Graham asked me to pass along. She gave a polite, almost apologetic smile. "He seems eager to smooth things over, though I understand your hesitancy." Leon hesitated, then took the folder. "Thanks." He had no intention of reading the letter right that second, but some small flicker of curiosity tugged at him. If Graham had poured his thoughts onto paper, maybe he was more serious about this than they realized. Lillian motioned toward the stairs. "Let's go then. No point dragging it out." Within half an hour, they were in the now familiar SUV, navigating the route from Manhattan to Connecticut. The drive felt even shorter this time, perhaps because every moment was saturated with impending confrontation. Lillian stared out the window, her mind a battleground of memories, worries, and reluctant hope. Leon tapped his foot against the floor. restlessness making him wish they could simply appear at the hospital and get it all over with. Ms. Reese sat in the front seat, murmuring sporadic updates into her phone, presumably coordinating with the hospital and Mr. Langford. When the SUV finally parked in the hospital lot, the twins practically leaped out, hearts pounding. Inside, they hurried through the corridors to Sarah's room. A nurse recognized them and waved them through without fuss. Sarah was propped up slightly higher on her pillows, and a small vase of flowers on the windowsill brightened the otherwise sterile space. She looked tired, but a determined set to her mouth told Lillian this was no random whim. Their mother was ready. "Mom," Leon said softly, sliding a chair closer to the bed. "You sure about this?" Sarah's eyes flicked to the open door, then back to her children. "Yes. If I keep waiting, I'll just spin myself into panic. Better to face him while I have you two here." Her gaze drifted to Ms. Reese, who stood in the hallway. "Is he already here?" Ms. Reese confirmed it with a nod. "He's just outside talking to the doctor. He didn't want to rush in." She paused, eyes trained on Sarah's bruised face. "Are you sure you feel strong enough?" A small, pained laugh escaped Sarah. "I don't know how strong I am right now, but I'll be weaker if I keep letting fear decide." She looked at the twins, a silent plea passing between them. They moved to either side of the bed, each placing a hand gently on her arm. The next moment stretched taut, until Ms. Reese slipped out and returned with Graham at her side. He entered quietly, his expression solemn. He'd removed his suit jacket and his shirt sleeves were rolled up in a way that made him seem both casual and uncharacteristically vulnerable. His gaze landed on Sarah first. "Sarah," he said, voice careful, "it's been a long time." Sarah swallowed hard. "It has," she murmured. Her uninjured hand trembled slightly on the bedsheet. "You look older," she added, almost as if trying for humor. A faint wry smile tugged at Graham's lips. "So do you, but you're still you." An electric hush fell, broken only by the steady beep of Sarah's monitoring equipment. The twins felt like bystanders at a reunion, both deeply personal and profoundly uncomfortable. They exchanged a quick glance, unsure if they should speak. Graham cleared his throat, stepping closer to the foot of the bed. "I'm sorry for everything," he said, quieter now. "I should have tried harder to find you. I know I can't fix the past." Sarah's eyes darted to the side, perhaps bracing for anger or accusations. Instead, she whispered, "I didn't want to be found." She looked down at her bandaged wrist. "Your world was so... I couldn't imagine raising children under that microscope. I was scared." A flicker of pain crossed Graham's face. "I wouldn't have forced that life on you," he said, though it sounded more like a question of whether he truly could have saved her from it. Lillian shifted, glancing away as her stomach churned with empathy and frustration. It felt invasive to be privy to such raw confessions. She also worried about Sarah's fragility. Her cheeks were already flushing with strain. At last, Sarah exhaled, turning her head toward Lillian and Leon. "Well, here we are, and they're old enough to make their own decisions now." Her voice softened. "But I want them to know you on their terms, Graham. Not yours, not mine, theirs." Graham's gaze finally rested on the twins, and a flicker of something like admiration passed through his eyes. "I can accept that. I just hope you'll let me help in any way I can, medically, financially, or otherwise, and maybe I can get to know them better." He swallowed. "If they're willing." Lillian exchanged a look with Leon. She could feel him bristle at the mention of money, but he spoke calmly. "We're not looking for a handout, but we want Mom to have everything she needs. The medical bills alone..." He stopped, a tightness forming in his throat. Graham inclined his head. Then let me cover those expenses, no strings attached. She shouldn't worry about debts while she's recovering. Sarah breathed a shaky sigh of relief. Though pride still tugged at her heart, she knew her children needed stability. "Thank you," she whispered, no sarcasm this time. From the hallway, Ms. Reese and a few staff quietly withdrew, sensing the conversation had turned personal. The four of them remained in a small circle around the hospital bed. Graham stepped closer, his hand hovering near Sarah's as if asking permission before he gently placed his fingertips over hers. Lillian and Leon watched their mother tense, then relax slightly. It was a tentative truce born out of necessity and regret. After a pause, Graham said, "How are you feeling, really?" Sarah exhaled, exhausted, sore, and worried about these two being dragged into that family legacy. She gestured at the twins. "I don't want them devoured by it." Graham's mouth twitched, perhaps at the term devoured. But he looked at Lillian and Leon with a steadiness that felt almost pleading. "We have a complicated family, yes, but it doesn't have to be a horror story. If you let me, I can shield you from the worst of it." Leon cut in, voice subdued. "We don't need shielding. We've taken care of ourselves our whole lives. But we wouldn't mind some honesty, like how exactly does your family treat newfound heirs? Is there some weird protocol?" A faint shadow crossed Graham's features. "Truthfully, yes, there can be. Some relatives might challenge your legitimacy. Some might worry about inheritances or the press, but I'll handle that. You shouldn't have to." Lillian edged closer to Sarah, resting a hand on her mother's shoulder. She tried to keep her voice calm despite the swirl of anger and hope in her heart. "We don't want to be paraded around like trophies or hidden away like secrets. This is our life, not a business move." Graham held her gaze. "I understand. I want to earn your trust, not demand it. We can proceed slowly. You'll meet whoever you want to meet. My siblings, my father. Only if you choose. No immediate announcements, no press. I promise." He paused, then added, "Sarah, I don't plan to expose them to any of it until they're ready." Sarah's eyes shone with tears. Whether they were from relief or sorrow was hard to tell. She managed a small nod. "Fine, but if they say stop, you stop. If they say this is too much, that's the end of it." Graham's voice was gentle in reply. "Agreed." Lillian and Leon exchanged another glance. The conversation ended more peacefully than they dared imagine, though the weight of the future still loomed. "We're going to step out for a minute," Lillian said, sensing the fatigue in her mother's eyes. "Let you two talk." Sarah nodded gratefully, and Graham looked startled but didn't protest. The twins slipped out to the corridor, exhaling tension like stale air. It felt strange leaving their mother alone with a man who might have been in their lives long ago. Yet maybe this was a chance for both parents to speak without teenage eyes and ears dissecting every syllable. "Do you think she'll be okay?" Leon asked, pacing near the window. Lillian watched through the narrow glass panel in the door. Graham had taken the chair beside Sarah's bed, leaning in to speak softly. It looked respectful, gentle. Lillian sensed some old bond still lay beneath their anger and mistrust. "I hope so," she said quietly. They waited in the hallway, occasionally fielding curious glances from passing nurses. After a while, Ms. Reese approached, having reappeared from wherever she'd been making calls. "How's it going?" she asked softly. Leon shrugged. "They're talking alone now." Ms. Reese nodded. "Might be good for them. Clear the air without worrying about you two." She paused, choosing her words. "I want you to know, if anything you hear from Graham or the family feels intimidating, come to me. I'll mediate as best I can." Lillian gave a tight smile. "Thanks. We're used to standing on our own, but we appreciate the offer." Eventually, the door cracked open, and Graham stepped out. His expression was weary, but not hostile. "Sarah's tired," he murmured. "She asked for you both." Lillian and Leon exchanged a look, then slipped back into the room. Sarah's eyes were half closed, but she lifted her head slightly when they approached. "How did it go?" Lillian whispered, taking the seat Graham had vacated. Sarah attempted a faint smile. "Better than expected. He actually listened, and I said some things I've held in for a long time." She cast a glance at the door. "He meant what he said, about helping and wanting to get to know you. I'm not telling you to forgive him, but maybe don't close the door on him yet." Leon swallowed, nodding. "We won't," he promised, voice quiet. "It's complicated, but we'll give him a chance." Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears of relief, and she sank back into the pillows. Lillian touched her mother's bandaged arm gently, feeling a well of sympathy. Whatever happened next wouldn't be smooth, but at least they were no longer spinning in the dark. A family was forming, fractured, unsure, but trying. And somehow, that realization carried a fragile sense of hope. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with friends. In the days that followed that tentative meeting in the hospital room, the uneasy truce between Sarah and Graham began to feel less like a fragile arrangement and more like a pathway forward. Lillian and Leon remained in the townhouse for the time being, though now they traveled back and forth to the hospital almost daily. Sarah steadily regained her strength, buoyed by relief that the twins were no longer caught in an invisible tug-of-war. And despite the lingering awkwardness between them, Graham often checked in, sometimes dropping by unannounced to ensure that the cost of Sarah's continued treatment was fully covered. Each time he did, the twins felt the push and pull of new possibilities. They'd never needed anyone's money before, yet their mother's slow recovery demanded more resources than they could manage alone. Mornings at the townhouse began to follow a routine. Lillian would wake at first light, slip into the hall, and discover that a breakfast spread had already been arranged by Molly in the kitchen. Leon, slower to rise, would join her a bit later, yawning as he poured coffee or juice. Even in their earliest years, they'd never eaten in such comfort, and the stark contrast with their cramped apartment left a pang of guilt. They found themselves wondering how Sarah would feel if she saw them quietly acclimating to this polished environment. But by midday, both twins would remind themselves that it was only temporary. They were not about to sign on as permanent residents of some stately city mansion. They spent a few afternoons walking around the neighborhood, sampling small cafes with the hush of wealth pressing in on all sides. Occasionally, they glimpsed expensive cars rolling by, or heard neighbors speaking about exclusive gatherings. It highlighted exactly how far from their old world they'd strayed. Some nights, Leon would gripe, "Everything's so fancy here. Even the supermarkets feel like they're made of marble." Lillian could only nod, recalling the far simpler stores they'd once frequented, scanning discount shelves for bargains. One late afternoon, Ms. Reese appeared at the townhouse with a calm but resolute expression. "I have the final DNA confirmation," she told them, standing near the ornate staircase as they listened with held breath. "It verifies beyond any doubt that Graham is your father." Lillian's chest clenched, even though she'd expected these results from the start. Leon shut his eyes momentarily, a low sigh escaping his lips. They no longer had any room for disbelief. It was official, there on paper, recognized by the law. A tense silence followed, broken only when Ms. Reese placed a hand over the folder. "Nothing changes immediately," she reassured them. "This just means any legal questions about your identity are settled." Not long after, Ms. Kincaid contacted them to confirm that the travel hold on their passports had been lifted. They were free to move about as they pleased, no longer restricted by the complicated flags in the system. Once again, Lillian felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. The impetus for their entire detour, the planned visit to Colorado, seemed far away now, overshadowed by the far bigger revelations swirling around their family. Leon actually made a wry joke about how their aunt in Colorado must think they'd vanished off the face of the earth. Lillian promised they would reconnect soon, maybe take that flight after all, if only to explain in person what had happened. Meanwhile, Sarah improved enough to move from the hospital bed to a rehabilitation suite on a nearby floor. Encouraged by the doctors to start gentle physical therapy, she managed short walks in the hallway, the twins following protectively at her side. Graham visited often, sometimes with Ms. Reese in tow, other times alone. At first, those visits felt stilted, an uncertain father trying to help without overstepping. But over time, a tentative pattern emerged. He arrived with flowers or practical gifts, asked how Sarah's therapy was going, and inquired about the twins' day-to-day experiences. He never insisted that they call him Dad, though Leon caught a flicker of yearning in Graham's eyes each time he spoke to them. One afternoon, Sarah was strong enough to venture into the hospital's small courtyard. She sat on a bench, sunlight warming her face. Graham stood a short distance away, giving her space while the twins hovered, ready to help if she lost her balance. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead, stirring a few early blossoms. Lillian found herself struck by how ordinary it looked. Just 4 people in a courtyard, talking and occasionally laughing. Anyone passing by might assume they were a standard family. She realized with a bittersweet pang that she'd longed for scenes like this her entire life, though it felt late in coming. In a moment of unguarded conversation, Sarah admitted she harbored fewer fears about the Hawthorne family's reaction. "If they discover you too are part of their bloodline, so be it," she told the twins softly. "You deserve to decide if you want to know your grandfather or your cousins. I just don't want you losing yourselves in that world of money and demands." Graham stood quietly in the background, giving no argument. He seemed to understand that fear wasn't erased by a simple wave of his hand. It would take consistent care and proof that he wouldn't weaponize their identity. By the time Sarah was discharged, a subdued celebration took shape in the townhouse. Mr. Langford, ever composed, arranged for a private car to bring her from the hospital to a smaller apartment in a different Hawthorne-owned building, one that Graham insisted on providing for her recovery. At first, Sarah resisted, balking at the idea of living anywhere connected to the family. But after a long conversation with the twins, she agreed. The alternative was returning to their cramped old space with precarious stairs and no accessible features. Graham's apartment, at least, offered comfort and safety for someone healing from injuries. Lillian and Leon set up their mother's new place as best they could, bringing over the personal items salvaged from their old home. They arranged photos on tables, pinned up drawings or postcards, and tried to replicate the familiarity of the life they'd shared. There were moments of strangeness, like seeing fancy furniture alongside the worn crocheted blankets Sarah had always loved, but it helped them weave old and new realities together. Graham paid for discreet movers to handle everything, ensuring Sarah wouldn't have to lift a finger until she was fully healed. In the weeks that followed, the twins discovered that their father's world operated on quiet efficiency. If they needed anything, Ms. Reese or a staff member would appear within hours, sometimes minutes. It made them uneasy at first. Leon joked that if he whispered about wanting a pizza, it might materialize on the doorstep. Lillian found it both convenient and unsettling. Convenient that her mother's medication pickups happened smoothly. Unsettling that everything moved at the snap of a Hawthorne finger. Yet she began to see glimpses of Graham's sincerity in those gestures. He never showed up unannounced at Sarah's new apartment, but he made sure to text or call the twins if he wanted to visit. He seemed determined not to push. Slowly, day by day, the tension softened. Sarah, though still cautious, allowed Graham into her space without bristling every time he spoke. And the twins, while hardly rushing to call him Dad, found themselves opening up in small ways. Leon once asked for help with a school project that involved corporate finance data, and was surprised when Graham sat with him for an hour, patiently explaining how markets moved. Lillian discovered that Graham, like her, loved old photography books, and they spent an afternoon flipping through images of cityscapes and discussing what made each shot powerful. These little bridges of connection sprouted almost despite everyone's defenses. Throughout it all, Ms. Reese maintained her role as a reassuring figure, juggling the Hawthorne family's administrative concerns. There were no grand announcements to tabloids, no dramatic unveiling of new heirs. Graham remained adamant that the twins' identities be kept private for as long as they wanted. "If you ever choose to meet Grandfather Wyatt, that'll be your decision," he told them. "He's not always easy, but he's getting older. Still, I won't bring you to him unless you say so." That promise made Lillian's chest loosen a fraction. She'd been half convinced they'd be herded into a family photo op at any moment. Instead, it felt more like they controlled the pace. When Sarah's physical therapy advanced enough for her to walk without a cane, the twins quietly decided it was time to revisit their original plan of traveling to Colorado, just for a week or so, to see their aunt who had been left in limbo. They raised the idea over dinner in Sarah's new apartment. Graham was there, as were Ms. Reese and Mr. Langford. A hush fell when Leon mentioned returning to the airport. Then Ms. Reese spoke kindly. "You're free to go whenever you like. The flagged passports have been cleared." She looked at Graham, who nodded in agreement. "You should visit your aunt," Graham said. "The next time you return, if you want, we can continue sorting out these new family ties." Sarah offered a tentative smile. "I think that's a good idea," she agreed. "We all need time to breathe, to figure out how this fits into our lives." A swirl of relief blended with sadness in Lillian's heart. She realized that stepping away might provide perspective. Leon caught her eye, and a silent wave of understanding passed between them. They would go, but they wouldn't vanish forever. There was something to come back to now, in the form of a father trying to redeem his past mistakes and a mother learning to trust again. A week later, Lillian and Leon stood in front of the airport security checkpoint once more. This time the mood was different. Their mother, not fully recovered but strong enough to travel a short distance, had come to send them off. Graham was also there, maintaining a respectful distance but offering a small smile whenever one of the twins glanced his way. The new passports in Lillian's hand carried no red flags, no hidden constraints. As the siblings prepared to walk through the metal detectors, they each turned back. Sarah waved, her eyes glistening. Graham lifted a hand in a hesitant salute. Neither twin spoke, but they nodded in silent recognition. At last, they stepped into the line, hearts fluttering, with a mixture of anticipation and calm. The overhead speakers droned flight statuses, and the swirl of travelers felt oddly normal this time. No one stopped them. No last name triggered any alarms. They passed through without incident, backpacks slung over their shoulders, heading to a gate that promised a new horizon. Yet they both carried an unspoken certainty that when they returned, their lives would not be the same as before. Now a piece of them belonged to a different story, one involving a mother's quiet sacrifice, a father's overdue remorse, and a future neither Lillian nor Leon could predict, but might finally embrace on their own terms. You've liked this story. Please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends.